Outside, in the pouring rain, only the piercing cries of the undead could be heard, foreshadowing the inevitable end. Every blow to the flimsy door echoed in the hearts of those holding it with all their might. Inside, barricaded, the girls prayed for salvation, seeing in every knock an approaching nightmare. The three guys, pressed against the door, didn't know how long they could hold back the pressure from outside. Yabe gritted his teeth, his face twisted into a grimace of desperate determination mixed with fear. Suddenly, a desperate cry was heard calling for someone to be let into this shelter. It was a female student with golden hair who begged to let their classmate Zhang Heng in, unable to abandon him to his fate. But the guys desperately holding the door shouted back that there were zombies swarming outside, and Zhang Heng was most likely already infected. Her angry voice sounded firm. She was ready to take full responsibility on herself, just to save her friend. She claimed that Zhang Heng was still alive and uninfected, appealing to their conscience that he could have died outside. One of the guys turned to Yabe, proposing a risky plan. He would open the door on the count of 3, and Yabe would have to immediately close it as soon as Zhang Heng entered. Yabe nodded with a worried expression on his face, then loudly began counting. 1! The golden-haired girl swallowed nervously, her eyes expressing a mixed feeling of hope and deep concern. On the count of 3, someone's hand sharply turned the door handle, opening a passage into the unknown. But instead of Zhang Heng, a terrifying figure with eyes glowing green burst into the opening, knocking down the first person who stood in his way. A cry of horror escaped the students as they realized the scale of what was happening. Yibei, stunned by shock, could only utter the name Zhang Heng. Zhang Heng. Before them was not a friend, but a monster with an open mouth, revealing rotten fangs and a writhing tongue. Zhang Heng, now a monster, lunged at the nearest one, and the terrible truth dawned on everyone: he was infected. The room was torn apart by the dying scream of a girl, whose pleas for help were drowned out by chaos and despair. The blow landed with inhuman force, followed by a distorted scream, drowned out by the chaos. The blow was followed by a horrific bite, and blood gushed out, signifying irreversible infection. Yabe was mad with pain, screams bursting from his chest, unable to contain the agony. The world around darkened in blinding pain. Consciousness flickered on the edge, and only echoes of old torments pierced the mind. Blood flowed down his hands, and his eyes reflected the hopeless horror of what he'd experienced. Images of chaos came one after another, crowds of distorted faces thirsting for flesh, an endless nightmare. In this hell, a desperate cry rang out, "Run!" But where to run from the approaching death? Cities burned, lightning tore through the sky, signaling the end of civilization. The world was plunged into a firestorm, where every flash of light brought destruction. And then he appeared, hooded and masked, with cold fury in his red eyes, bringing change. She stood beside him, majestic and calm, surrounded by her faceless guards. A voice from the future, distorted by pain and steel, whispered, "There are only 2 things I want." And Yabe, a fire of determination flashed in his eyes, as if he had seen the way. But reality was catching up. He was being pushed away from the locked door, deprived of a chance. "Please, let me in." Yibei's plea for help seemed to be drowned in indifference. Suddenly, a familiar voice, the class president, resolutely declared that she would not abandon her comrade in trouble. Yibei glanced at her, a hint of recognition flashing in his eyes. "That's right, she's still so young now." Her angry cry cut through the noise. "Are you deaf? He's going to die there," a reproach full of despair and indignation. At this moment, a dark smile flashed across Yibei's face. "This is a day I will remember forever. The mechanic sent me back to change everything." But those who held him only desperately retorted, "There are a lot of zombies outside. Zhang Heng has already infected him. Do you want us all to die?" The girl entered the argument, desperately trying to destroy their groundless, as she thought, accusations, demanding proof of something she herself had not seen. Yabe, gritting his teeth in a bitter smile, only dryly agreed with their verdict, as if challenging fate itself that had locked him in this doomed cycle. Backed against the wall, he abruptly challenged her, demanding that she open that door so that she could see with her own eyes the horror outside. Her eyes widened in sudden realization as Yebei's voice took on a tone of something inexplicably ancient, eerily familiar, as if he were speaking not only to her, but to the past. A ringing silence hung in the air, broken only by the ragged breathing of the other girls who had become silent witnesses to the impending tragedy. But the girl's furious cry pierced the silence, accusing him of weakness, while a dark smirk already twisted Yibei's lips. His face twisted into a macabre grin as he finally ripped off the mask, hurling venomous words at her about those who only talk and leave the dirty work to others. But, pushing him away with disdain, Li Ruoshi rejected his words with burning determination, declaring that she knew no fear and was capable of handling everything herself. And just as Yibei recoiled in horror, trying to stop her, Li Ruoshi, without flinching, slammed open the door hiding them, throwing a contemptuous warning over her shoulder to anyone who doubted her strength. And while the sound of the door being thrown open echoed in the corridor, Yibei, as if rooted to the spot, only followed it with his eyes. The door, which had served as a fragile shelter just a moment ago, burst open with a crash, throwing the student standing before it back like a rag doll. Instant shock paralyzed the others, their eyes widening in horror as the veil of secrecy that had hidden them was torn to shreds. Pain shot through the fallen girl, but the physical blow was followed by a far more terrible realization, reflected in her distorted face. In the opening, where a second ago there was only emptiness, now stood an ominous figure, barely visible in the semi-darkness but full of deadly menace. A hideous roar erupted from the mangled mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth while deathly green eyes glowed with hunger and madness. Their classmate, Zhang Heng, a once familiar face, was now a monster infected with a nightmare that came for them, bringing a new wave of panic. Instinct demanded they run, but where? They were trapped, surrounded, and the monster, slowly advancing, was tightening its deadly noose. Despair turned a man into a beast. The girl, fearing her own death, clung to her comrade, ready to push him into the arms of death for a second of salvation. But in the midst of this chaos, when it seemed that all was lost, a shard of glass flashed in the hands of another girl, an improvised weapon, the key to a desperate struggle. A Yebei, with a sinister grin on his face, did not hesitate to take advantage of this chance, watching one victim push another away in order to survive himself, and preparing to strike. The monstrous grip closed, leaving no chance of salvation. A terrible grin loomed over the victim, and a desperate cry of horror pierced the air. But before the darkness could swallow everything, Yebei unleashed a blow, and a crimson fountain of blood flooded the floor, ending the agony. The girl's frozen face, sprinkled with someone else's blood, reflected only shock and numbness in the face of a new, terrifying reality. And Yebei himself, grinning, enjoyed the moment, feeling the taste of victory, even if it was only fleeting. He methodically finished off the fallen monster, making sure that it would not rise again, that the threat was finally eliminated. Wounded and bleeding, the girl stretched out her hand to him, begging for help, calling his name in her dying despair. But Yebei only looked at her coldly, remembering old grievances and anticipating new retribution for his past humiliation. She, crushed by the monster, tried to push the door, realizing with horror his true intentions. And Yebei pushed her away without hesitation, slamming the door and cutting off her escape route while the others watched in horror. There was a steely determination in his eyes. He had made his decision, and nothing could make him change his mind. Those remaining inside began to panic and block the passage, desperately trying to strengthen their shelter. Every box, every board pushed against the door was another nail in the coffin of hope for those left outside. And outside, under the growing roar, her desperate knocking could be heard, her pleas to be let back in. But the walls of boxes grew, reliably sealing the passage, and no one dared answer her call. Her voice broke in despair as she reminded them of her situation, trying to appeal to their conscience. Inside, the students screamed in horror as the monstrous sounds behind the door grew louder. The barricade grew stronger, becoming the last line of defense, a trap for some and salvation for others. Finally, an ominous silence fell, broken only by occasional sobs, leaving behind the door only vague shadows and horror. The question hung in the air. Did she manage to escape, or did she become another victim of a ruthless world? Despair permeated the air as the shadows whispered of Yebei's cruel decision to banish old age and Zhang Heng's gruesome death at the hands of the zombies, leaving everyone in a state of icy terror. And so, before them stood the one who had once been a friend, now a grim silhouette with a bloody wrench, and the question, what happened to him, hung in the air like a harbinger of trouble. The two girls, huddled close to each other, shuddered at what they saw, their faces distorted by unbearable fear and whispers of despair. The smile that flitted across Yebei's lips brought no comfort, but only intensified the feeling of growing menace, turning it into something completely alien. "No, no!" A desperate cry burst from their chests, as if denial could change this nightmarish reality. One of the survivors, wounded and trembling, broke the silence with words of gratitude to Yebei, convincing him that he had saved him from old age. His words were echoed by others, who justified Yebei's cruelty as necessity and the conviction that old age was going to betray them all. Yebei, with frightening calm, told them not to be afraid, but asked them to open the door. He was going to go outside and look around. His words sounded like a thunderclap, causing a new attack of panic. Outside, because behind the door only the unknown and death awaited. Yi, as if making excuses, said that he felt guilty for driving out old age and wanted to know if she was alive, to which the others, in horror, asked him not to do this, reminding him of the zombies. Suddenly, his patience snapped, and Yebei's furious cry pierced the air, causing the survivors to cower in fear, obeying his will. He moved resolutely towards the door, ignoring the desperate attempts to stop him, and behind him he heard a grinding sound and a whisper of doom. With a wrench in hand, Yebei stepped into the light-flooded doorway, leaving behind only frightened faces and a ringing silence. From a high angle, Yebei can be seen looking around. There is no one around. No old age, no Zhang Heng, only empty courtyards. He shielded his eyes from the blinding sun with his hand, his gaze sharp and intense, and frightened shadows watched him from the doorway. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the door behind Yebei slammed shut, leaving him alone outside in rapidly encroaching isolation. From behind the door came frightened cries. "Quickly, barricade the door. He's too dangerous. Who knows who will kick out next? He's a born killer." Yebei only chuckled coldly, his face not flickering at the accusations, only confirming their worst fears. The survivors looked out the window, wondering why he wasn't trying to break back in, and where he was heading now, leaving their shelter. Suddenly, one of them screamed in horror, his face contorted in a grimace of incomprehension and shock when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Their blood ran cold as they saw him fearlessly step towards his doom. The hideous creature let out a guttural roar, its dead eyes blazing with an ominous light. But Yebei didn't even flinch, clutching the bloody wrench tighter in his hand. A creepy grin appeared on his face, foreshadowing inevitable violence. Like a predator, he rushed forward, launching a reckless attack. The exhausted survivors could not believe their eyes, their screams drowned out by panic. The creature was taken aback, letting out a death rattle as the blow became inevitable. With terrifying force, Yebei brought his improvised club down on the monster's head. A loud scream erupted from his chest, mixing with the crunch of bones and splashes of blood. One blow followed another until the creature's lifeless body collapsed to the ground. The survivors watched this with chilling horror, realizing that Yebei was much more than just a man. The wrench, covered in blood, lay silently on the grass, testifying to what had happened. Yebei leaned over the dead zombie, a strange, victorious grin lit up his face. But his actions were not yet finished. His hand dived into the mutilated flesh. And so, he pulled out something incredible from the monster's head, a glowing green sphere. In front of him lay a dismembered corpse, and in his palm lay a mysterious artifact. "Yes," he whispered with a triumphant smile, calling it energetic black gold. The mysterious ball emitted a soft green glow, pulsating with energy. Yebei's bare feet walked on the grass, leaving an invisible trail behind them. He looked into the distance, his gaze full of determination, ready to face new challenges in this harsh world. But the harsh world was not long in coming, once again revealing from oblivion another nightmarish creation. Yebei seemed to no longer feel any fear, only a cold determination burning in his eyes as he raised his fearsome weapon. The heavy wrench rose into the air, cutting through it with unfamiliar, practiced force. Outside the window, as if on the screen of a monstrous film, a scene of unimaginable cruelty and a struggle for life unfolded. Locked in their fears, the classmates watched as their former friend transformed into something else. Has he really decided to destroy them all? A whisper of horror ran through them. He's changed beyond recognition. Has he always been like this? A mixture of disbelief and disgust sounded in their voices. But when their shelter ran out of supplies and the sounds of carnage still rang in their ears, another thought emerged. What if he can save us? The argument flared up furiously. Some saw him as a monster, others as the only, albeit crazy, hope of escaping the trap. Suddenly, a deafening blow shattered the glass, causing everyone to flinch in surprise and fear. Standing on the threshold of the gaping void was Yebei, his face lit up by a strange, almost insane smile, inviting them into his bloody world. The faces of his classmates distorted with pure animal horror as they realized the significance of his proposal. Light and shadow danced in his eyes, reflecting the abyss into which he had plunged to live. But the world gave no respite. A sudden cry from one of the students indicated a new threat that had arisen right behind Yebei. Another zombie, a dead man in what had once been decent clothes, reached out its clawed paws towards him, full of hunger. Yebei didn't flinch. His movements were instinctive, honed to perfection, anticipating every attack. The blow was lightning fast, designed for weakness rather than brute force, and he responded with cold precision. A red cloud of blood blossomed in the air, and another monster fell to the ground, lifeless and finally defeated. EBay stood above him, breathing heavily, his gaze cold and empty, like that of a predator that had just finished hunting. This was his world now, a world where the strongest survived, and he was ready to play by its cruel rules until the very end. Even with blood on his face, eBay wiped away the remnants of the battle, and his gaze became even colder. But their frightened eyes, looking at him through the bars, reflected not only horror, but also a silent question. A shadow of regret flashed in the depths of his gaze, quickly replaced by cold calculation. He explained that he must walk the path forward alone, fearing that his unpredictable transformation could become a threat to those around him. Throwing a cheeky hasta as a parting shot, La Vista, he stepped into the unknown, leaving behind broken glass and old connections. His comrades could only watch him walk away, wondering what force was driving him now. Inside, amid the rubble of their former life, a lingering silence hung, full of fear and uncertainty. The outside world seemed calm, but the deceptive sun only emphasized the ominous emptiness. Ye Bei, armed with only a wrench, walked along the treadmill, each step a desperate quest for survival. The steps beneath my feet counted down the seconds of a new, terrifying countdown. After all, it was Judgment Day, the beginning of the end, when the zombie virus spread across the world, consuming one life after another. He understood that every corner of this city was now a battlefield, and he had to go through it alone. The city, which had once been bustling with life, now lay silent, shrouded in an eerie silence. And he remembered the price of his survival, an amputated arm, lost due to someone else's mistake, which changed him forever. Everywhere there were only signs of decline and decay, a dark echo of the new reality. But time did not stop. Its mechanism continued to count down the moments in this doomed world. And this movement, this inexorable passage of time, led him to a specific place where he hoped to find answers or salvation. With every step Ye Bei took, he delved deeper into the labyrinth of deserted streets, his determination growing. And those who were still hiding in the shadows watched him, not understanding how it was possible to walk through this hell with such cold-blooded determination, almost a smile. Arguments about him flared up behind his back. Some saw him as salvation, others only a potential threat, an already infected madman. But Ye Bei did not listen, continuing on his way. His path lay through once familiar courtyards, past abandoned playgrounds where now only shadows of the past wandered. But these shadows did not sleep. They felt his presence, their guttural roar echoed across the wasteland. And he knew that every step, every sound brought him closer to an inevitable collision with them. One of them, with eerie glowing eyes, was already aiming at him, preparing to throw. In the blink of an eye, the numbness lifted, and the dead, as if awakening from a nightmare, rushed forward. Hidden nearby, the living only watched in horror as Ye Bei seemed to be condemning himself to certain death. But a familiar, almost mad grin flashed across his face, a challenge thrown down to fate itself. His grip on the heavy wrench tightened, foreshadowing imminent reprisal. With his first swift blow, he unleashed the full force of his weapon on the nearest creature. Without slowing down, he dealt blow after blow, turning his opponents into a bloody mess. Even the defeated he did not give a single chance, completing the terrible work with icy calm. To those who saw it for the first time, his methods seemed inhumanly cruel. But somewhere in the darkness, behind a hidden window, someone else was watching this carnage closely. And this look did not bode well, full of ancient hatred and thirst for revenge. Ye Bei stood among the fallen, his breathing ragged, but his gaze remained firm. Suddenly, his instinct told him that the danger was not over yet. New silhouettes appeared on the horizon, attracted by the noise of the battle. His lips pressed together in a grimace of displeasure, realizing that the battle was far from over. They approached, each with their own thirst, or rather hunger. Damn, flashed through his mind. A little noise, and now there's a whole horde on our tail. He rushed forward, desperately trying to break away from the onrushing horde. But his desperate run did not go unnoticed. Ye Bei gritted his teeth as he rushed through the narrow streets, his gaze taking in every detail. In front of him was a shuttered store door that either promised or deceived salvation. He pounded the metal, leaving bloody marks of his desperate hope on it. Every blow echoed with a plea, "Let me in. For heaven's sake, let me in." Only the indifferent camera lens silently recorded his cry for help. "I'm wounded. The creatures are chasing me." His voice broke, trying to break through the steel barrier. But behind the door, in the dim light, there were only whispers of doubt and a reluctance to take risks. The seconds ticked away. The door remained an impregnable fortress, and behind me, a new, disgusting shadow appeared from behind, from around the corner. The nightmare took on flesh and bared, rotting teeth. Without hesitation, Ye Bei slammed his club down on the creature, scattering what was once flesh. One by one, he held back the onslaught, his every movement a cry for survival. But even the most desperate warrior can be driven back by the wall of advancing darkness. He fell, feeling a burning pain, but his gaze remained sharp, full of unbending will. Outside, the horde continued to beat against the shutters, like a surf of despair and hunger. Standing up, Yabe met their gaze again, the gaze of predators sensing the proximity of prey. Somehow, the shutter gave way, revealing the semi-darkness of an empty store before him. And among all these abandoned goods, he saw her, another living soul, hiding in the shadows. While Ye Bei was making his way through the darkness, somewhere in the distance, under the still, peaceful sun, chaos was flaring up. Among the relatively surviving people, overcome with fear and confusion, incredible rumors spread. Someone saw a boy single-handedly crush a horde of the dead, and it seemed absurd. But for others, more pragmatic and cruel, this news became a call to action. After all, if a simple schoolboy could do it, it means the threat is not that great, and it's worth taking the risk. A wave of wild courage or despair swept through the crowd, pushing them to reckless actions. And in the semi-darkness of the store, Ye Bei seemed to have already foreseen this dangerous turn of events. His gaze pierced the shadows, confidently searching for the one hiding in the depths of the shopping arcade. He demanded the remote control for the shutter, intending to lock himself inside, to break away from the growing madness. The girl hesitated, and every moment of delay seemed like an eternity, increasing the risk. But fatigue and pain sapped his strength, and every breath was difficult. Old wounds, which had just healed, made themselves known again, piercing the body with sharp pain. The girl, who had been hiding until now, saw his suffering and froze in indecision. But the survival instinct proved stronger than fear, forcing her to rush to help. She handed him the medication, hoping that it would somehow ease his suffering. But instead of gratitude, Ye Bei abruptly grabbed her hand, cutting off her impulse. His gaze changed, becoming hard and demanding, revealing his true intentions. "Don't be afraid," he hissed with a crooked grin. "Just give me the remote and I'll let you go." But she only clutched the treasured button tighter, not understanding why he needed it. And then he, throwing aside all politeness, ordered her to immediately give him the key to salvation. She clutched the treasured item, her eyes wide with animal fear, hiding behind shelves full of indifferent goods. Suddenly there was a deafening crash, and someone's rough foot came down next to her with all its force, causing the girl to scream in horror. Ye Bei, his face distorted with pain and despair, shouted at her in a breaking voice. What a naive and gullible fool she was. But the girl, not listening to him, did not leave the wounded man, with trembling hands preparing a first aid kit. Blood soaked the bandages, but she continued, methodically trying to stop the fountain of life leaking from his body. Every touch was torture for Ye Bei, but he gritted his teeth, knowing that this was his only chance of survival. Finally, breathing a sigh of relief, she stepped back, scissors in hand, and looked at her work with satisfaction. The wounds were bandaged. Ye Bei looked at her with deep gratitude, the words about saving his life escaping from his lips. She carefully closed the medicine cabinet, remembering how she had found it among the chaos of the empty store. "Rest," she said, promising to bring food, and Ye Bei, exhausted, only whispered words of deepest gratitude. He thought about the long journey that had led him to this door and the courage that had made her open it for him. Without her, he knew, his fate would have been sealed, death by blood loss or the claws of insatiable creatures. But a sudden, piercing scream broke the silence, coming from the darkness of the open door. Ye Bei shuddered, his eyes widening in horror as he realized that something monstrous was approaching their hideout. A creepy grin appeared from the shadows, and a rough voice thanked her for opening the door, but not for him. The girl stood there confused, her voice shaking as she tried to remind them of their cry for help, of their hunger. In response to her question, the leader of the group, surrounded by the same bandits, only grinned. "Now everything here belongs to us." He grabbed her, and her desperate cry for her father was met with a sinister laugh and a chilling confession of his tragic fate. His gaze was full of malice, and her eyes, full of tears, reflected all the horror of the hopelessness that had gripped her. In an instant, Ye Bei collapsed to the floor, bleeding profusely, while the shadows of the uninvited, cruel guests loomed ominously above him. In the icy streams of his soul, Ye Bei tried to wash away not the blood, but the weight of realization. Under the sun there is always a shadow, and sometimes it is he who carries this darkness. But even in his attempt to find oblivion, his loneliness was broken by a timid knock on the door, so fragile against the backdrop of the recent chaos. The sound pierced him like an electric shock, tearing him out of his stupor only with a new wave of rage and painful shock. An unexpected guest stood before him, babbling embarrassed apologies and explaining her arrival as being concerned about his dirty clothes. But Yeve, overcome with pain and despair, could only sharply throw out an order, demanding that he be left alone immediately. The girl, stunned by his sudden abruptness, could only quietly mutter agreement, meekly accepting his refusal. While Yebe, standing under the icy streams, poured out his pain in bitter questions about the survival of those who are incapable of cruelty in a world where only it rules. And it seemed that only the icy streams of water could wash away, even for a moment, the burden of what he had experienced, offering Yebe a brief, almost forgotten luxury of purity in a world where there was nothing left but struggle. But even this fleeting purity could not drown out the premonition of an approaching storm. As he dried his damp hair, he still felt a tinge of anxiety, but his mind was already clinging to a simple truth. The shelter of the store gave them temporary respite and an abundance of resources. He looked at his reflection, and a cold calculation flashed in his eyes. The next goal was to find equipment and weapons. He involuntarily touched his skin, surprised by its smoothness, youth, and the strength that still glowed inside. The absence of aches and pains in the body seemed to be a luxury in this crumbling world, a short but sharp moment of enjoyment of one's own vitality. As he left the bathroom, his gaze fell on the neatly folded clothes waiting for him in the gloomy silence. The snow-white shirt, clean and untouched, seemed like a mockery of their current situation. This suit? For fighting monsters? His voice was filled with confusion and irritation at such an absurd choice. But somewhere in another area, under an indifferent sky, someone's voices were already gathering into a single, determined chorus. In the semi-darkness of a nightclub, among the broken bottles, a menacing silhouette with a knife in his hand called the survivors to their attention. His words were sharp as a blade. The shelter could not last forever. The supplies only delayed the inevitable. The plan was simple and brutal: clear a path of the dead, and then take by force what would ensure their survival. The leader revealed a frightening detail. Not only was the little girl hiding in the store, but also a mysterious schoolboy who had recently joined her. With a wild gleam in his eyes, he ordered them to rush forward, destroy the dead, and take everything, the supplies, and, most importantly, that girl. Meanwhile, behind the steel shutters of the store, a fragile peace seemed to reign, surrounded by countless shadows of the hungry dead. Inside, the little inhabitant, gently stroking the bandage on her knee, was carefreely enjoying her snack, immersed in cozy solitude. Suddenly, Yebe's rough voice pierced the silence, demanding that she come out of her hiding place immediately. The little girl, peeking out from behind the counter in fear, saw only the stern silhouettes of his legs. He asked sharply if she was alone and where her family was, his tone betraying the concern hidden behind the irritation. She looked up, her eyes full of fear and confusion, unable to give an answer. There was a note of pure anger in his voice. How could she let a stranger in when she was alone, and why wasn't she afraid of him? With tears in her eyes, she barely managed to say that she saw his wounds, his blood, and simply could not leave him to die. Yi Bei, not listening to her excuses, with a new fit of anger asked if she hadn't seen the zombies chasing him, to which the girl only nodded fearfully, claiming that she had been watching what was happening on the cameras. He clutched his head, his words laced with bitterness and despair. Such a naive and cowardly girl would only become a burden, and perhaps it would be better to get rid of her before it was too late. But deep inside, in his eyes, the thought of complete loneliness flashed, of the fact that there would be no one to take care of him. His gaze became hard, and his tone commanding. From now on, she would do whatever he said, and any disobedience would cost her her life. And outside, hordes of the dead, as if sensing prey, with wild cries and outstretched hands approached their shelter. Suddenly, one of the thugs, gaping, found himself in the dead man's deadly embrace, his scream echoing through the street. Chaos engulfed the street, screams of pain and terror mingling with the groans of zombies as the gang found itself surrounded. The leader, watching the enraged crowd of the dead, could barely contain his panic, while his henchmen were already doubting, remembering how easily that same schoolboy had defeated them earlier. Through rage and fear, the leader, drenched in sweat, ordered his men to remain silent and continue fighting. But the fear was stronger. One of the bandits, his face distorted in a grimace of horror, screamed, calling on everyone to run, saving their lives. The leader's fury fell upon the fugitive. A steel grip seized his hair, and a cry of horror rent the air. The doomed bandit was captured, and a ring of the dead closed around them, their hands reaching out, foreshadowing the inevitable. His frightened face was distorted in death throes, and his cry, full of despair, seemed to be addressed to those who were supposed to protect him. The leader continued to fight back desperately, his anger turning into impotent rage at the fact that the crowd of dead did not end, no matter how much they were chopped down. And then he himself, having lost all hope, began to scream, calling for flight, his voice drowned out in the general chaos of the panicked retreat. Meanwhile, somewhere on the other side of the city, life went on as usual, and the streets looked empty, but deceptively calm. Yi-Bei was deep in thought, holding a strange green pill in his hand, when a girl with some brewed noodles appeared behind him. She then handed him a thermos of boiling water, trying to please him, but his gaze still wandered, as if in another world. Receiving only a muffled "uh-huh" in response, she slowly retreated, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the pill. He finally began to eat, removing the lid from the noodles, from which delicious steam rose. With a habitual movement, he took a plastic fork into his hand. And, as if by magic, all his detachment disappeared, giving way to pure, undisguised appetite. He sucked on the noodles greedily, not noticing that a few strands were hanging from his lips. The familiar and comforting taste brought a wide, happy smile to his face, and he said, "So delicious, pure nostalgia." Yi-Bei leaned back comfortably in his chair, thinking that such simple noodles would become a luxury, a real delicacy, in the future. But the outside world did not allow us to forget about itself, and ominous shadows flickered outside the window, reminding us of the constant threat. Yi-Bei frowned as he heard some unusual noise from the street, which was at odds with the usual dead silence. Suddenly, a deafening crash shattered the tranquility of the room, and the window glass shattered into thousands of sharp pieces, causing Yi-Bei's eyes to widen in shock. A dirty hand reached out from the gaping opening, grabbing the remains of the frame, trying to crawl inside. And then Yi-Bei saw it was the same bandit leader, wounded and enraged, who, cursing the dead, somehow miraculously broke through their crowd. The intruders seemed to have decided to barge in without any ceremony, and Yi-Bei froze, clutching the half-eaten noodles in his hands. The bandit's voice, full of rage and despair, demanded immediate help, threatening reprisals for refusal. But there was no trace of fear on Yi-Bei's face, only cold determination as he reached for the heavy object. He took a step towards the window, holding a thermos in his hand, and the bandit, puzzled by this strange choice, watched him, not understanding the plan. A light click. The thermos lid came off, foreshadowing something unexpected. A stream of hot water gushed from the neck of the thermos, sparkling in the dim light. The scalding spray hit the bandit's hand, causing him to flinch. An enraged cry erupted from his throat as Yi-Bei continued to mercilessly water the wound. The smile on Yi-Bei's face was sinister, every movement expressing the cruel intent to kill first. But then someone's small hand grabbed his elbow, interrupting the reprisal. It was that same girl, with her eyes wide open in horror, who begged him to stop. Her voice trembled with fear as she begged to simply let the stranger in without harming him. The bandit leader, wounded and puzzled, looked up with difficulty at this strange scene. Yi-Bei's eyes narrowed, a hint of irritation flashing in them at this unexpected interruption. He scolded her sharply, reminding her of his orders and that she had no idea who this man was. But the girl, through her tears, stubbornly repeated her father's instructions that one should not harm living beings. A tense silence hung in the air as Yi-Bei's gaze shifted from the girl to the bandit and back again. "Silly," Yi-Bei whispered, asking if she wasn't afraid that this man might kill her. But then the bandit himself, his eyes wide in comic horror, hastily assured that he had no intention of causing harm. He, with a pitiful semblance of a smile, began to explain that only hunger and despair had driven him here, escaping from the crowd of the dead. And here he is, that same stranger, stuck in the window, desperately calling for help, while crowds of undead swarm below. A glimmer of determination flashed in Yi-Bei's eyes, but he couldn't allow this innocent girl to witness such cruelty. With a dull thud, a heavy boot landed on the floor, and the uninvited guest was finally inside, blocking their escape route. And only now, when the door closed behind him, his face was distorted by an open, predatory grin. The huge, red-haired giant straightened his shoulders, smugly declaring that this refuge now belonged to him. The girl standing behind Yi-Bei's gaze was filled with genuine horror and despair. Meanwhile, outside the window, a crowd of dead people raged, their menacing roar drowning out the last echoes of hope. In the depths of the room, other survivors, including Yi-Bei, listened in tense silence to the approaching chaos. "The zombies are almost through," an old man's desperate cry breaks the silence, blaming everyone for his misfortune and his poorly executed attack. While the woman, clutching her head, grieved, the men spoke with bitterness about the scolopendra, hoping that he had died. The wooden door gives way. Cracking and crunching sounds mark its destruction under the pressure of rotting hands. Yi-Bei and his companion, their faces distorted with horror, realize that they now have nowhere to go. "Hey you, stop whining," comes a desperate cry addressed to two girls frozen in a daze, demanding their help. Together, they struggle to hold the creaking door open while the man mourns his lost peace. But suddenly, a spark of hope flashes in the old man's eyes. He plans an escape through the balcony. The world outside seemed deceptively calm, only the store sign looming in the distance, not foreshadowing the impending disaster. And at that moment, through the broken window, that same bandit burst into the room, his wild laughter echoing. His gaze is full of contempt as he asks the girl with a smirk if she could really be so naive as to believe his lies. Extending his hand towards her, he offers her with a cynical grin to become his slave, promising to teach her everything. Rage flares in Yebei's eyes, the veins pulsating in his temples as he holds back his anger and unleashes an angry shout at the bastard. The scoundrel, not embarrassed by his own words, howls with rage, demanding an answer for his scalded hand. Hysterical laughter contorts his face as he describes his twisted revenge, promising to mutilate bodies and stuff them into flower vases. But Bei only looked at him silently, his gaze full of cold contempt hiding the storm inside. The words froze on his lips, but his resolve grew stronger with each passing moment. His hand, without trembling, reaches for the dangerous blade, preparing for the inevitable. At this critical moment, the girl, frightened and trying to defuse the situation, begs them to come to their senses, offering shelter and food. Bei and his opponent look at each other, their gazes filled with tension, an understanding that a truce is impossible. The girl, as if trying to melt the ice, gives them a tense smile, inviting them to forget their troubles over a shared meal. But her words only add fuel to the fire. The bastard explodes with rage, rushing forward furiously. Bei reacts instantly and pushes the girl away, taking the blow himself, and the sharp edge of the blade meets his flesh. A sharp cry of pain pierces the air. His hand is stained with blood, and his gaze is distorted with amazement and agony. But Bei doesn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he pulls the blade out, gripping it in his hand with a new, deadly determination. The villain's eyes widen in horror, a belated realization flashing in them, but it's too late. With lightning speed, his hand shoots up again, and the blade flashes through the air, searching for a new target. A desperate lunge, and Bei's blade stops dangerously close, and a burning mixture of anger and fear can be seen on the bastard's face. However, the villain doesn't give up, delivering a powerful kick that sends Bei flying away. Bei's body flies limply, and a painful cry escapes from his chest as he loses his balance. The girl's frightened scream echoes him as she falls to the floor, pressing herself into the ground in fear. The bastard, breathing heavily, looks around, and on the floor, among the dust and chaos, lies the treacherous knife. Bei lies motionless, his body frozen, and only the scoundrel's gaze, full of anticipation, glides over his defenseless figure. The villain, with a mad grin, swears that no one and nothing in his entire life has taken away so much from him as this despicable Bei. His powerful hand clenches into a fist, ready to unleash all his fury on his defenseless victim. Bei, gritting his teeth in pain, tries to rise up, but every movement is followed by a painful groan. The boot comes down again, and a cry of despair and unbearable pain erupts from Bei's chest. The shadow of the executioner looms over him, demanding an answer. How could Bei so easily deal with a threat that cost his people so many lives? But Bei, despite his position, only smirked mockingly, offering to exchange the secret for respect. The villain's gaze turns bloodshot, and an angry grimace distorts his face, foreshadowing imminent retribution for his insolence. For refusing to follow his will, merciless blows rain down on Bei, while a defenseless girl watches nearby, frozen in horror. Her eyes, full of fear, reflect the monstrous scene unfolding before her. But Bei, despite the pain, gathers his remaining strength, his gaze focused on protecting the one who is dear to him. Exhausted and exhausted, Bei finally breaks down, promising to reveal everything if only this torture would stop. The villain leans in to hear his words, promising to make his death easier if the secret is revealed. In response to this, Bei, gathering his last strength, spits blood directly into the face of his tormentor. The bloody splashes only add fuel to the fire, and the villain's face, distorted with anger, once again burns with rage. Bei instantly pushes him away, and a sudden kick causes the monster to stagger back. The blow hits its target, and dark stains of blood bloom on the opponent's shirt. The villain's red eyes, full of primal rage, do not bode well. In response to Bei's insolence, he unleashes a barrage of blows on him, declaring a deadly game. Furious cries of "Die!" echo as the boot comes down on Bei again and again, driving him into a corner. But even on the edge, Yabe finds the last of his strength to pull out a small but deadly knife from his sleeve. Suddenly, an uninvited savior appears, plunging a blade into the aggressor's shoulder. Confusion and pain distort the attacker's face as the sharp steel pierces his flesh. But the wounded beast's rage does not subside. He grabs the girl, trying to push her away. With a wild roar, he throws her away, and she falls helplessly to the floor. His gaze, full of hatred, promises reprisals against the suddenly appeared protector. At this moment, Yabe, overcoming the pain, grabs the floor hanger and strikes. A powerful blow shakes the bandit's head, and he collapses limply to the floor. Silence falls in the room, broken only by Yabe's heavy breathing as he stands over his fallen enemy. Exhausted but not broken, Yabe breathes heavily, his eyes burning with righteous anger. The girl, shaking with shock, slowly rises, her gaze fixed on the blood on her hands. Horror fills her soul. She realizes that, for the first time in her life, she has taken someone's life. Yabe's soft touch on her shoulder tries to bring her back to reality. He tries to calm her down, convincing her that she was only defending herself from the scoundrel. But in her eyes one can still read bewilderment and sorrow about the lost faith in the kindness of all people. Suddenly, noticing a slight movement from the bandit, Yabe abruptly interrupts her thoughts. Yabe's words about the villain still being alive make her genuinely surprised. And now she is rushing to help her offender, trying to heal the wound she inflicted. Beside himself with such a naive impulse, Yabe roughly pulls her back. He is stunned by such inexplicable kindness and cannot believe its stupidity. His face expresses deep irritation and complete incomprehension of such behavior. Yabe doesn't understand such compassion because this person is just a source of trouble who has defiled his space. With a determination bordering on fury, Yabe seizes upon the victim, intending to clear out his room. Through the shards of the broken window, Yabe pushes the heavy body out with incredible effort. Yabe's final sharp kick causes the massive body to lose its balance. His figure rushes down into the abyss, towards the living dead. A hard fall ends any chance of salvation, and below, starving and merciless, bloodthirsty creatures are already waiting for him. They surround him from all sides, their shadows thickening over the fallen one. Horror distorts the features of the defeated man as the reality of what is happening crashes down on him. The heart-rending screams are drowned out by growls, and his body becomes prey to the hungry crowd. Yabe, watching from above, comes to a cold conclusion. Other people's lives are just expendable material in the struggle for one's own survival. A stern determination was frozen on his face. He was ready to do anything to stay alive. And then, in the midst of this merciless scene, he notices another figure clinging to the balcony. A young survivor, pale with fear, screams, driving away the dead that are reaching out to him. His scream attracts Yabe's attention, causing him to feel a new wave of anxiety. Through the broken window, Yabe asked if there is anyone still alive down there, but the desperate response of the survivor shatters the last hopes. No one. His words, full of pain, paint a picture of the recent tragedy, futile resistance, and inevitable end. Exhausted and frightened, the survivor begs for help, looking into Yabe's face. However, Yabe, cold and calculating, only advises him to run away, as there is no other way out. The horrific reality of the street washes over the desperate survivor, but his gaze remains fixed on Yabe. Despair contorts his face as the last drop of hope runs down his cheek. Giving in to instinct, he throws himself into the void, jumping over the railing to find salvation. He manages to cling to the flimsy structures, but even this moment of survival does not relieve the tension from him. He runs through the streets, past the broken signs of the nightclub, leaving behind a destroyed world. Beyond the shards of glass, somewhere out there, an inexorable threat is moving, and Yabe looks at it without sympathy. A cynical smile touches Yabe's lips. He feels no pity for such trash, only annoyance. The city below is teeming with the walking dead, their monotonous murmur drowning out the last echoes of hope. A broken window hangs over the void, a reminder of a life lost and a monstrous reality. The door slowly opens, revealing the entrance to a secret hideout. Inside, huddled in a ball, sits a frightened girl, her eyes full of fear, and the bandages on her legs indicate wounds. Yabe looks down at her, his irritation visible, demanding an explanation as to why she is still here. The girl seemed to shrink even more, trying to hide from his sharp gaze. He frowns, assuring her that the other one is already far below, as if trying to calm her down or, on the contrary, reproach her. A spark of surprise and hope flickered in her eyes. Did he really manage to escape? She looks at Yabe questioningly, and a subtle, ambiguous smile appears on his face. The words catch in her throat, but her gaze is full of unspoken confusion. Suddenly, Yabe suddenly extends his hand, and the girl recoiled in fright. A flash of rage distorts his features. He shouts at her, recalling the fable of the farmer and the viper, calling the saved man evil. To survive, you must be ruthless, his voice thunders, repeating that this is an apocalypse where there is no place for compassion. Her eyes are full of horror and confusion, as if every cry he makes is tearing her soul apart. But anger gives way to pain, and Yebe, clutching his chest as if trying to hold on to the elusive calm, decides to wash this nightmare away. The girl, with dried blood on her sleeves, stretches out her hand to him, trying to utter at least a word. Yebe's gaze twitched sharply, catching movement in the darkness, and a sharp pang of alarm pierced his heart. He barely manages to catch her when she collapses limply, stumbling down the steps like a mown blade of grass. His face contorts into a grimace of rage and worry. Ibe screams for an answer, but the girl is no longer able to give one. He lifts her into his arms, carefully holding her fragile body close to him, while anxiety squeezes his heart even more tightly. Every step echoes in the empty corridors as he carries her through the darkness, searching for shelter. Finally, he carefully lays her down on the makeshift bed, bending over her with unusual tenderness. His palm touches her forehead, trying to calm the inner fire that is burning her from the inside. There must be medicine, somewhere around here, Ibe mutters, frantically rummaging through his things in search of at least some kind of help. Memories emerge in fragments, distorted by time, and he tries to piece them together, feeling how precious knowledge is slipping away. And then his gaze falls upon a saving box, a first aid kit, a ray of hope in this hopelessness. His eyes narrow as he looks inside, preparing to fight for her life. Among the bandages and bottles, he notices something different, a pink notebook with a naive rabbit drawing. Donation list? EBay says out loud, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. Meanwhile, the girl continues to lie unconscious, her breathing barely audible in the silence of the room. And then, turning the page, he realizes that he is holding something much more important in his hands, her medical records. Yabe shifts her gaze from the document to the fragile figure, realizing the gravity of her condition, her helplessness. The card clearly reads, Yao Yue, age 14 years old, a fragile girl. Under the thin fabric of the sleeve, bandages are visible, through which an alarming redness appears. The girl writhes on the bed, her face distorted with suffering, and every movement echoes with unbearable pain. Yabe looks at her silently, realizing that the old world, the world before the disaster, has been erased forever for her. In his open palm lie small green pills, glowing with an unearthly, faint light. He looks at her and then at the pills, his heart heavy as he decides her fate at that very moment. Outside the window, eternal night reigns. A gloomy sky hangs over empty streets, swallowed by darkness. Vile creatures emerge from the shadows, their guttural growls echoing throughout the deserted city. And yet, through this darkness, a timid dawn is breaking over the horizon, painting the sky with hope and a new nightmare. The sun rises higher, but its rays only emphasize the devastation and silence of the empty buildings. In the light of the new day, they look even more terrible, scurrying shadows, thirsting for flesh. Their bared mouths and empty, glowing eyes are what remains of humanity. He, Yebei, sleeps, exhausted, curled up on the table, trying to cling to the elusive scraps of sleep. The awakening is harsh, with a hoarse sigh and bitterness in the mouth, returning to this gloomy reality. His wrinkled shirt and pale face speak of sleepless nights and constant struggle. Ibe looks up, his eyes reflecting the weight of his experiences, but also his unbending will. And then a cautious look appears from behind the door. Yao Yue, frightened, but alive. He tries to smile at her, asking how she feels, if she is awake, concern flashing in his voice. And she, despite her fragility, is already trying to hammer something in, showing her determination to survive. She looks out again, hesitantly, with a barely audible, full of uncertainty. Yebe waits patiently, knowing that she needs time to get used to this new, scary world. She responded timidly, digesting Yebe's words, her gaze revealing a vague misunderstanding. Yebe is reserved, his gaze is sharp, but the girl seems to only catch part of what he said, her questioning gaze directed at him. And here she is, disheveled and frightened, daring to ask the most important question for her concerning her father. Ibe explains that this place is not safe, and a logical thing to do would be to find her father and entrust him with the care of his daughter. But she hesitates, remembering her father's strict orders to lock herself in and wait for his return without leaving the shelter. His face contorts into a grimace of worry and barely noticeable irritation at her childish naivety. Embarrassed, almost in a whisper, she admits that she has been waiting for 3 long days. Ibe frowned, his mind already drifting to foreboding, and he asked, How long did these supply runs usually last? The answer shocks him, only half a day, not 3 days, and the terrifying truth begins to slowly break through the childish denial. Yebe seems to have already seen the whole picture, and his words, full of cold logic, send her into a panic attack. She screams in despair, clinging to the last straw of hope, denying the obvious because her father promised to return. Yebe dispassionately brings the harsh reality down on her. 3 days of silence, 3 days of no news, 3 days that mean one thing. He looks at her again, his gaze full of determination. He understands that inaction now is tantamount to death. Determination is evident in every tense muscle of his face, and anger flares in his eyes. She clings to her father's command again, cornered, afraid to violate his will even if it means doing nothing. Ibe's temper flares up, his patience snapping, and he throws angry words in her face, not understanding how she can reason like that. He screams, and his words hit her with such force that she winces and only babbles incoherent excuses. But then his anger turns to fierce determination. He announces that they will go look for her father, for he owes her his life. His commanding tone makes her flinch and finally obey, rushing to get ready. But even this small step is difficult for her, and she stumbles, falling to the floor like a cornered animal. His face is distorted with despair and disbelief as he realizes the full horror of the situation. Outside the window, the ordinary urban landscape still reigns, but behind this veil of calm, chaos is already lurking. And so, the first swallows of the apocalypse, disfigured figures with burning eyes that greedily look up, as if sensing prey. The earth shakes from their slow but inexorable steps, and every sound is a harbinger of horror. Suddenly, the horizon is cut by the swift silhouette of a car rushing towards this living wall of the dead. The zombie horde, attracted by the noise, turns around, their hungry groans filling the air, anticipating a new victim. A powerful blow. Steel crushes rotten flesh, and one of the monsters flies to the side like a rag doll. But the car doesn't stop, cutting its way through the crowd, leaving behind only a chaotic mess and torn bodies. A lifeless body, mutilated beyond recognition, lies on the asphalt, but this death is only a moment in an endless nightmare, and while the city is burning, other monsters are already circling the walls of the abandoned shop, their instincts leading them to any opportunity. Inside, Yebe moves quickly, filling her bag with the bare essentials, instant noodles, a simple but vital supply. Each can, each pack is carefully packed into a voluminous travel bag, because you never know when the next opportunity to eat will present itself. He turns around, his gaze falling on the secluded spot where his companion is peeking out, and Yebe impatiently asks if she is ready or still hiding. And here she appears, dressed in a cute school dress, as if oblivious to the threat looming over the world. Yebe, holding back a sigh, comments on her outfit, reminding her that they were not going on a picnic. But he quickly dismisses the idea of arguing and turns the conversation to something more pressing, making noodles. A quiet yes leaves her lips, confirming that she has fulfilled his request. Without wasting a moment, Yebe greedily pounces on the hot noodles, each sip becoming a symbol of fragile survival. Accompanied by the sound of chomping, they share this simple meal in eerie silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Yebe's gaze grows heavy. He eats, but his thoughts are already far away, planning his next step in this dying world. Words promising a quick return echo in the cold air, but the girl only continues to crunch sharp chopsticks, immersed in her simple meal. Each bite becomes a sharp note in this eerie symphony of survival, filling the store with the only living sound. But the silence was suddenly broken by Yebe's curiosity, who, noticing the familiar delicacy, couldn't resist asking. The girl looks up at him, her golden eyes showing a subtle hesitation, but then she silently hands him the bag. This small, almost intimate act of sharing food in an empty world takes on a special meaning, becoming a tiny bridge between them. But they barely had time to share this moment when the peace was shattered by a deafening blow that shook everything around to its foundations. Shelves slide off their hinges, their contents, once neatly arranged, now scattering in a chaotic dance. Deodorants, shampoos, creams, everything is mixed into one mess, turning an ordinary store into a scene of destruction. Yebe instinctively pulls the girl towards him, his gaze darting around the store, trying to figure out if this is an earthquake. But the next blow, even more powerful, leaves no doubt this is not an act of nature. It is something artificial, something terrible. Horror distorts Yebe's features as he sees nothing less than a massive armored vehicle breaking through the wall of the store. With a monstrous screeching sound, the SUV's wheels grind down what was once a man, now just a silently screaming mass. The roar of the engine and the clang of metal fill the space as the Colossus drives straight into the sales area, smashing the remains of the walls. And then, from under the rubble, a heady boot appears with a careless step, followed by its owner. An ominous laugh echoes from the low ceiling as a figure in tactical goggles throws his head back, savoring the moment. A menacing figure appears before Ye Bei and the girl, a corpulent man in camouflage, with a smug grin, anticipating easy prey. Without a single emotion, he finishes off the already defeated zombie, demonstrating his ruthless nature. His movements are full of contempt, as if he is not just dealing with a monster, but also humiliating the pathetic remains of a former life. With a cry of triumph, this uninvited guest declares his rights to every product, as if the store were his personal storeroom. Now these unfortunate goods, so recently carefully stored, are just trash scattered across the floor, waiting for their new, impudent owner. That terrifying grin stretches in anticipation of the coming prey, and his laughter sounds like an echo of victory in the ruined sanctuary. With a frantic greed, he seizes the treasures that scatter across the floor, and his cries of triumph fill the air, proclaiming each found goods as his own personal booty. And Ye Bei, frozen in the shadows, felt icy sweat trickling down his back. It seemed as if he had found himself in the very epicenter of another nightmare. And now, with a terrifying determination in his eyes, he himself became the creator of this horror, putting a sharp blade to someone else's throat. And at that very moment, through the yellow glare, his gaze seemed to pierce the soul, full of sudden, chilling awareness. After all, in the reflection of other people's eyes, he saw not a victim, but his own destruction. His mind exploded in horror as the world around him, full of familiar details, crumbled to dust like crumbling cookies. His reality was distorted beyond recognition. And then, through the veil of distorted reality, a furious face, distorted with malice, stared at him. His hand darted out, the blade flashed, and a deafening cry of horror rent the air. A murderous rage distorted Yubei's face as he rushed forward, shouting curses. The victim, gripped by panic, begged for mercy, her desperate words drowned out by the noise of chaos. Suddenly, through the carnage, a shrill female voice was heard calling for an end to the senseless violence. And, from the depths of a half-destroyed store, a very young girl covered her mouth with trembling hands, unable to tear her eyes away. The blade froze millimeters from the skin, gleaming menacingly, while the victim waited in a cold sweat for the outcome. The girl, having gathered the last of her courage, reminded him of her pragmatic duty, that she must answer for the damage. Ye Bei froze, his gaze sliding from the frightened man to the suddenly appearing protector. Slowly, a creepy smile spread across his lips, as if a new thought had dawned on his cruel mind. And so, instead of death, a different fate awaited the victim, to become an unwitting participant in someone else's game, a driver in someone else's car. The new driver immediately began giving orders, mercilessly demanding that the confused girl load the luggage. Bewilderment filled her gaze, as she barely understood what was happening. Meanwhile, a real madman was sitting behind the wheel of the armored car, who, with a sarcastic grin, apologized for ramming the store, allegedly not knowing about the presence of people. The fragile girl, covered in bandages, was dragging the heavy luggage with difficulty. Her strength was running out. Suddenly, her gaze froze, her wide eyes betraying the approaching danger. The horde of the dead seemed to appear out of nowhere, slowly but inexorably advancing towards them, causing the air to thicken with fear. The truck driver, who had been crushing zombies in droves, only grumbled irritably about the new batch, but the order was given, "Get in the car quickly." The girl, clinging to her backpack, tried to get inside as quickly as possible, but every movement was difficult for her. The sharp slam of the closing door cut them off from the outside world, trapping them inside a metal cage. "And don't forget to buckle up," his ominous voice rang out before the armored car took off. At full speed, the armored car crashed into a crowd of zombies, mercilessly sweeping away everything in its path. Ye Bei, pressed into his seat, couldn't help but scream, his body thrown from side to side by the frantic ride. Hand on the lever, foot on the pedal. Every maneuver was precise and merciless, like the strike of a predator. The streets turned into a bloody meat grinder, where the armored car became a weapon of destruction, leaving only chaos and death in its wake. The driver just laughed loudly, enjoying every moment of this wild carnage. A sudden turn, and the car crashed into something with a roar, causing another surge of adrenaline. Yibei's face twisted with rage, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white, foreshadowing an imminent explosion. Unable to bear it any longer, he put a knife to the driver's throat, demanding an explanation for his reckless driving style. But the brute simply waved it off, declaring that he had to deal with all the zombies, and Ye Bei still hadn't told him the destination. And only then did Ye Bei, turning to the frightened girl, ask the only question that could change everything. "Tell me, where is your father now?" The girl, clinging to the seatbelt, haltingly told that her father was going to the Eastern Market and that it was the last time he had been there. The brute, turning onto the road, grumbled about the crowds at the market, but quickly realized that he had no choice. Bei, internally cringing with a premonition of disaster, only nodded silently, agreeing with the inevitable direction. Their armored monster rushed forward, leaving behind a city teeming with slowly wandering shadows. After a while, trying to ease the tension, the thug suggested turning on some music, to which Ye Bei only grimaced. Only the girl's quiet giggles in response slightly broke the dead silence of the cabin as the car picked up speed. But the idyll was interrupted by a terrifying silhouette on the road, a new type of monster from whose flesh roots grew as if they had dug into death itself. His gaze, full of ancient fury, pierced the approaching car, his hands with clawed appendages raised in a threatening gesture. The impact was inevitable. The massive machine crashed into the mutant, tearing his body apart. The ferocity of the collision was behind them, leaving only a bloody trail and torn remains on the asphalt as a reminder of the fight. It seemed to the driver that this was just a funny sight, and he allowed himself to laugh. But ahead, like a ghost from the abyss, a new creature was already looming, burning the road with bestial fury. And again, that crazy, booming laughter echoed throughout the cabin, ignoring the growing threat. Ye Bei, gritting his teeth, couldn't understand this recklessness and desperately asked if the driver really wanted them all to die. However, the driver simply waved it off, confidently declaring that a strong car would turn any zombie into nothing more than a pitiful bug. The driver's reckless confidence forced Ye Bei to take extreme measures, and, grabbing a knife, he began to shout, demanding that he stop immediately. And then the driver's confidence instantly evaporated, replaced by icy horror. The car, their only salvation, had completely run out of fuel, stuck in the middle of danger. At that very moment, when terror gripped everyone, Ye Bei, who was tightly clutching the knife, shouted out in shock what was on everyone's mind. And in response to his angry cry about fuel, which echoed in the dead silence, the driver could only croak hoarsely about fatal forgetfulness and the lack of life-saving gas stations, causing the air around him to thicken to a death groan. And at that moment, when Ye Bei's gaze fell on the empty fuel gauge, the last spark of hope died out in his eyes. And then, through the glass, clutching at her hair, came the chilling scream of a frightened girl, realizing the full horror of what was happening. Her eyes widened in panic as a disgusting, decaying face, spewing drool and madness, pressed itself right up against the window. All hope was shattered when it became clear that the car was surrounded on all sides by an inexorable crowd of hungry dead. Inside the car, Ye Bei clenched his fists and looked angrily at the trembling driver and the stunned girl. If we get surrounded at this rate, we'll just die here. The zombies outside were thrashing against the metal hull, their rotten bodies dancing madly as they tried to break through the steel shell. A sudden blow shook the car, and one of the monsters, thrown back by an unknown force, fell onto the asphalt. Ye Bei rushed out, a deadly blade already gleaming in his hand, and a cold, calculating fire lit up his eyes. A moment later, the approaching creature was already baring its teeth in a deadly grin, but the next moment, the blade was already cutting through the air. With ruthless precision, the blade pierced the monster's skull, and a fountain of dark blood stained the ground. A bloody blade flashed menacingly right next to the head of the girl, who, huddled in a corner, watched the bloody dance in shock. Excellent! A devilish grin curled Ye Bei's lips, anticipating a fight with death itself. A new growling monster, larger and more menacing, was already approaching, but Ye Bei only calmly turned his head, not losing his ardor. Take that, he growled, raising his sword in a powerful swing. An ordinary knife won't finish off such a fat zombie. And the steel crunched into the head of the next monster, piercing it through in a bloody dance. A furious battle raged around the car. Ye Bei rushed among the dead, turning them into bloody pieces of flesh. He kicked one away and then, without wasting a second, plunged the blade into the head of the other, precisely and deadly. His hands tightly clutched the bloody blade, which had become an extension of his will, merciless and inexorable. With a powerful blow, he pinned another monster to the ground, his eyes burning with determination and cold fury. Finally, an ominous silence hung in the air, broken only by the wheezing of the dying and the heavily breathing Ye Bei, standing over a pile of fallen enemies. The driver, broken and shocked, grabbed his head with shaking hands. Too cool! The young girl, who had become an unwitting witness to this bloody massacre, could only freeze, watching Ye Bei with horror and disbelief. But Ye Bei, without giving himself a break, was already wielding his improvised weapon, forcefully breaking out some part. With his shirt bloodied and a wild gleam in his eyes, Yibei towered over the fallen driver, his cry a mixture of despair and command. There was no time to waste. Grabbing the stunned driver by the collar, Yibei began to explain to him with furious rage. Staying here meant certain death. Ahead lay only an unknown path, but along it there might be abandoned cars, and with them, the hope of a few precious drops of fuel. However, hope for salvation was crumbling with every step, because ahead of them lay not just abandoned cars, but new hordes of insatiable dead. Their insatiable hordes were already closing the ring, leaving no chance for retreat. Yibei, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, gives an order that was supposed to save at least one life, leaving the girl in the apparent safety of the car. The time for doubt was over. Only instant, albeit brutal, decisions could give them a chance, and Yibei, gritting his teeth, demanded immediate action despite the shock of those around him. And without waiting for an answer, he himself rushed forward, cutting through air and flesh with his sword, throwing himself into a deadly whirlwind, while behind him, every blow of his blade died away in horror. Remembering the missed opportunity, this man only cursed his short-sightedness, and panicked sweat ran down his temples. But Yibei had no time to think. His blade cut through the air, meeting flesh in a bloody dance, every movement filled with desperate, animalistic rage. He had barely finished when he heard the call of his ally calling him to leave the battlefield, as if his own actions were an annoying delay. And as he watched Yibei fight, he only grinned contentedly, seeing in each of his blows not a feat, but only a resource that could be used profitably. Once again, the blade flashed in Yibei's hands, piercing the monstrous figure, and a splash of scarlet blood became the final touch to this deadly picture. A dead silence fell upon the ground as Yibei, stained with blood, stood over his fallen enemy, his posture expressing nothing but deathly fatigue and cold determination. Suddenly, his gaze froze, and an expression of stunned disbelief appeared on his face. The words of his ally cut him more deeply than any blade. He, instantly realizing his mistake, hastened to apologize, attributing his words to shock and fear, but his haste revealed only insincerity. He hurried to the car, muttering excuses and promises, trying to please, but his chuckles betrayed an ominous note. Yibei only frowned, clutching the bloody sword in his hand, his gaze full of wariness, which did not bode well for anyone who dared to play with his life. Yibei, with his always wary gaze, gave an order, demanding that his assistant obtain something that had yet to be discovered. The assistant, frozen in anticipation, had no idea what a gruesome trophy he would have to extract from the dead man. The fat man's face was distorted with confusion and slight fear. He clearly did not expect such a turn of events. But Yibei didn't hesitate, decisively plunging the blade straight into the monster's skull, demonstrating skill and composure. From the terrible wound that pierced the dead flesh, something unnaturally shiny, hidden inside, appeared. And now, in his hand, a creepy green bead was already shining, like a precious stone extracted from the abyss of a nightmare. The assistant, horrified by what he saw, quickly denied it, preferring to wait in the relative peace of the car. But Yibei was adamant, his cold order forcing the fat man to comply, despite the lack of a suitable tool. No more excuses, just a clear division of roles. Yibei is the executioner, the fat man is the breadwinner, and the price of delay is one's own life. While Yibei was crushing the dead in the whirlwind of battle, the assistant only watched silently, drenched in cold sweat. And now another dead man has fallen, leaving his terrible secret under the watchful gaze of the frightened fat man. He sighed heavily and set to work with disgust, every gesture betraying his internal struggle with the abomination. Thoughts of the dreadful task drove him crazy, causing bouts of nausea from the need to dig through dead brains. But there was no choice. Armed with a small shovel, he demanded protection before plunging into this nightmare. Yibei, holding back his irritation, merely reminded him to hurry up and not waste time on idle chatter. The assistant, bending over the victim, could not help but notice the perfect precision of the cut made by Yibei, and then his own shovel crunched into his skull, following suit, piercing the bone. To his surprise, the zombie's skull turned out to be unusually fragile, yielding to his tool like cardboard. An incredible sight met his gaze. Several shimmering beads, like eyes, glowed in the dead heads. In his hand was finally that very pearl, black, but shining from within with a green light, like a revelation from the depths of this new, eerie world. The contrast between greed and a mortal fight was stark, but right now, all of Yibei's thoughts were focused on survival. The fat man, holding the glowing sphere in his hand, seemed to only sink deeper into his selfish dreams. Meanwhile, Yibei dealt blow after blow with merciless precision, clearing a path of the dead. Another infected fell at his feet, forever freed from his tormented form. Finally, a brief moment of respite. Yibei looked around the empty street, realizing that the most dangerous enemies had been defeated. His blade, stained with blood, reflected the grueling weight of the battle he had just fought. Turning to his companion, he inquired, not without weariness, about the results of the harvest. And he, with a smile beaming with anticipation, showed a whole handful of these mysterious green spheres. Yibei, although he recognized the difficulty of such a task, immediately gave the order to clean them and carefully fold them. Pleased with the result, they headed to the car, preparing to continue their unpredictable journey. However, as soon as Ye Bei opened the door, his gaze froze and a look of deep bewilderment flashed across his face. In the back seat, bound by wounds and unconscious, lay a young girl. A shocking realization hit him. What was she doing here? How did she end up in their car? Ye Bei rushed towards her, trying to shout, to reach her through the veil of unconsciousness. Anxiety and confusion mixed on his face as he carefully lifted her head. The girl's forehead was burning and sweat was running down her temples, confirming her worst fears about her condition. Ibe frantically began rummaging through his bags, looking for anything that might help, especially water. Every drop of water was worth its weight in gold, and he carefully gave her a drink, hoping to ease her suffering at least a little. While the fat man, surprisingly, offered his help, Ibe sternly ordered him to fill up the car and get behind the wheel. The girl, sighing with relief, fell asleep again, and their path seemed to have changed forever. The fat man behind the wheel glanced nervously at the sleeping girl and the tense Ye Bei, sensing that the peace would not last long. The sudden, sharp jerk of the car made him cry out in fear, and the blood in Ye Bei's veins instantly froze with rage. An enraged Ye Bei, ready to rush into battle, sternly threatened the driver if he endangered their lives. The flashing blade of a knife at his throat made the fat man instantly change his tone and promise complete submission. Ye Bei only let out a heavy sigh, his face still contorted with tension, while the girl slept peacefully, unaware of the chaos that was unfolding. The car rushed forward, leaving behind the city outskirts, plunged into silence and oblivion. Behind them there remained only the shadows of the dead, lying like a silent reproach on the ruined asphalt. The armored car cut through the air, carrying them away from the nightmare into an as-yet unknown but no less dangerous future. Ibe, holding his knife at the ready, silently peered at the scenery flashing outside the window, his gaze sharp and wary. He glanced sideways at the fat man, who, despite his nervous smile and sweat, dared to speak. As if reading the driver's mind, Ibe coldly demanded that he introduce himself before asking questions. The fat man chuckled nervously and introduced himself as Zhao Han, the manager of the auto repair shop, and began to tell his story. He told how the city had fallen, how everything had fallen into chaos, and how he had no choice but to save his own skin. This impressive car, left by a friend in his workshop, became the only hope, because the friend never returned. Yibei slowly began his introduction, but suddenly his words were cut off. Suddenly, without warning, Zhao Han's foot pressed down hard on the pedal, causing the car to jerk forward or brake sharply. Yibei, suddenly leaning forward, instinctively grabbed the knife, his eyes widening. "Have you decided to die?" he shouted, again pointing the blade at the sweating driver. Zhao Han's face twisted in horror, as he saw what had caused him to react so abruptly ahead. Directly in front of them, the bridge was littered with burning, mangled cars, creating an insurmountable barrier of fire. Explosions shook the air, flames blazed, drawing the bridge into a hellish whirlpool of destruction. Somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, through the pain and haze, a young girl awoke, with difficulty forcing out a groan. Ibe turned to face her. His words were sharp, but there was a hidden sense of relief in them that she had woken up. Her gaze slid to the window, and horror instantly overwhelmed her when she saw the outside picture of the world. The flames on the bridge, the burning carcasses of the cars. It was not a sight for the faint of heart, and she instinctively reached out to her father. Her eyes opened in a desperate cry of silence, reflecting all the pain and fear of loss. The driver, keeping his cool, suggested a detour, knowing it would take longer, but there was no other way. Yibei agreed, but clearly outlined a new goal. They needed to find better equipment to survive. With his gun in his hand, Yibei waited for the driver to focus on finding solutions to the chaos. Suddenly, a wide smile blossomed on the driver's face. He had an idea. "Let's go there," he declared, and Yibei only gave him an appraising glance, prepared for any turn of events. A sharp screech of tires broke the silence as the armored SUV made a sharp turn, choosing a new path. The driver began to tell them about an old blacksmith in the south of the city whose skills were legendary and could be their salvation. The word forge caused a flash of hope in Yibei, and his gaze became more determined. True, after the apocalypse began, it's unknown whether he remained there, the driver added, smiling ironically. Yabe thought darkly about what he had just heard, while the driver hummed carefree, ignoring the horror around him. Happy memories of his youth, of carefree melon theft, momentarily distracted him from the harsh reality. The girl put her finger to her lips, pointing at Yabe, who seemed to have fallen asleep, causing the driver to become confused. Meanwhile, their armored jeep was already racing across another bridge, leaving the burning hell behind. Each turn of the wheel marked a path to the unknown, to new hope in a world engulfed in chaos. Their destination appeared, announced by a loud shout from the driver. Before them stood an abandoned building, almost unchanged despite the past decade of chaos. However, Yabe didn't share his nostalgia. His gaze was gloomy and wary, sensing danger. "Pray that the local blacksmith survives the apocalypse," the driver said with a sinister grin, "or this will be your last task." But their conversation was interrupted by monstrous creatures crawling out of the shadows of the destroyed building. "Looks like we're going to have to do some cleaning up," came the determined voice of the driver, ready for another battle. "Is this your blacksmith?" Ibe asked mockingly, pointing at the dead men, and the driver only chuckled uncertainly. The balance of power was familiar. Ibe was the sword, the driver was the collector of precious pearls. The young man's eyes gleamed with steely determination, long forged in countless battles with the undead. Suddenly, a girl jumped out of the car, full of a naive desire to help in this bloody matter. "Stay in the car and don't get in the way," Yabe snapped, not wanting to risk her fragile life. But the girl insisted, assuring that she would be extremely careful and would not become a burden. Then the driver handed her a shovel, instructing her to collect the valuable pearls like a junior fighter. "Get bitten, and I'll kill you myself," Ibe warned, his words sounding like a final, terrifying warning. The girl shuddered, but meekly agreed, understanding the seriousness of the threat in this cruel world. With lightning speed, Yabe swung his sword, cutting off the head of one of the monsters, staining the ground with blood. While Yabe continued fighting, the driver questioned the girl about her relationship with the young man, but he only silently hacked at the dead. Meanwhile, somewhere nearby, in one of the surviving buildings, another scene was unfolding. A familiar scene unfolded in someone's field of vision, the struggle for survival, the collection of trophies and deadly blows. The unknown observer, holding his breath, tensely watched their every movement, his gaze full of anxiety and surprise. A man emerged from the shadows, his face contorted with annoyance and his gaze suggesting that he'd been caught off guard. At that moment, another one appeared in the doorway, completely panicked, trying to convey something extremely important before it was too late. A moment later, the roar of a shot broke the silence, foreshadowing the inevitable tragedy. The death blow fell upon the intruder, and life left his body in a bloody mess. Standing coldly over the lifeless body, the owner of the house seemed to be passing judgment, pointing to his victim. His face expressed annoyance, and his words sounded like a reproach for breaking a rule, the absurdity of which only emphasized his power. Ibe stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide as he stared at the horrifying scene, his breath caught in shock. The owner of the room turned around, his gaze full of contempt, stopping at the newcomer, waiting for an explanation from him. Yabe, trembling with fear, began to report incoherently about the uninvited guests who had appeared at the forge and were destroying the zombies. The man's face, which had recently been so irritated, now showed a subtle interest that foreshadowed change. Yabe, clutching his hand to his chest, admitted with excruciating pain that one of the new arrivals was familiar to him. The observer, lost in thought, slowly brought the cigarette to his lips, his gaze becoming penetrating and cunning. A wave of the hand and the order is given, demanding immediate execution from the obliging girl. She silently handed him the tray with the sealed portion of food without looking up. The tray appeared in front of Yabe, offering him an unexpected reward or perhaps a test. Yabe, stay shocked, awkwardly accepted the package, his hands shaking slightly. "This is your well-deserved reward," came a voice full of hidden threat. "Eat, and then tell me all the details." "Thank you very much, boss," Yabe exclaimed, unable to contain his gratitude, while the owner of the house only briefly clicked his tongue. The boss briefly touched the girl's hair, a gesture full of imperious disdain. Looking into the distance through the telescope, he smiled smugly. "There's no need to rush yet, I'd rather enjoy this show." While the boss was enjoying the show, elsewhere his subordinate froze in horror after receiving a shocking order: clean up the bloody mess. His gaze, full of insane cruelty, slid over the bloody floor, and a smirk on his lips did not bode well. But far from these secret games, Yabe and his companions fought fiercely for their lives, where every swing of the blade decided their fate. Another mindless monster fell, impaled on the tip, leaving behind only a pool of blood and destruction. After the bloody battle, the little girl, despite the horrors around her, proudly showed Yabe the pearls she had obtained. Yabe, taking command, divided the tasks, Zerdai was to inspect the perimeter, while he himself was to go deeper into the shadow of the abandoned house. A decisive kick, and the rotten door flew off its hinges, revealing an entrance to unknown depths. Step by step, he sank into the darkness, and every sound echoed off the old stone walls. Inside, there were signs of someone's presence, logs piled up in a heap, and heavy chains hanging from the ceiling. The burning stove clearly indicated to Ye Bei that the owner had been here just recently, or that he had left this place right before their arrival. Zerdiai soon joined in, confirming the fears. The owner of the house could most likely have only recently escaped. Without wasting any time, Ye Bei demanded the collected pearls and ordered Longshanks to continue searching. His hand gripped the handle of a powerful machete tightly, preparing for new challenges. Longshanks, holding his weapon, asked in bewilderment about the next step, since their main goal was to find something more effective. But Ye Bei was already holding a long metal rod in his hands, urging them that they would need more powerful equipment. Surprise was evident on Zerdiai's face as he realized the seriousness of the situation. Ye Bei's shouts broke the silence, emphasizing the urgency and importance of their mission, and Longshanks only let out a bewildered breath in response. Even the little girl, looking at the fussy Longshanks, couldn't help but sigh slightly. And she herself, with her finger on her chin, wondered what she should do in this dangerous place. Meanwhile, a flame was blazing in the oven, foreshadowing that this place would soon be transformed. The sounds of the forge filled the air, heralding the beginning of painstaking work. The blacksmith, having changed his appearance and filled with determination, put on his work gloves. The red-hot metal plunged into the fiery heart of the furnace, ready to be transformed. With each blow of the hammer, blinding sparks flew across the workshop, giving birth to a new form. The relentless rhythm of the knocking filled the space, causing even the observer to hold his breath. The fat man's face expressed undisguised surprise and anticipation of something grandiose. The blacksmith held out the blank, demanding from his assistant a valuable ingredient for his creation. With slight amazement, the fat man carefully lowered the emerald spheres into the crucible. Under the influence of unbearable heat, the green pearls began to glow, filling with mystical power. Melted, they turned into a seething mass, emitting an unearthly glow. "A wonderful effect," exclaimed the fat man, amazed by the spectacle of boiling magic. With a calm movement, the blacksmith pulled a sharp blade from his belt. And then a fresh wound appeared on his palm, a bloody streak cutting across the skin. Clenching his fist, he allowed drops of his blood to fall into the green brew, causing a burst of new energy. Having completed the mysterious ritual, he carefully removed the crucible from the flame. And so, the green essence flowed in a thin stream, promising unprecedented power. The metal greedily absorbed the green glow, transforming under the gaze of the astonished fat man. Once again the hammer fell on the anvil, but now each blow filled the air not only with sparks, but also with green light. Outside the workshop, amidst the destruction and shadows, the echo of hammer blows echoed throughout the area. While fate was being forged outside other travelers were climbing the stairs, approaching the epicenter of events. While Ye Bei felt the hostile gazes on him, one of the uninvited guests was already trying on his fate. Another, with a predatory gleam in his eyes, was already anticipating his vile prey. But not everyone was so reckless. Some remembered the influence of the mysterious Brother Lo and the strange purity of this territory. And yet, the thirst for profit outweighed caution. A plan for a daring attack was outlined in the twilight. The sun was slowly setting, illuminating the shabby walls and abandoned mechanisms. Inside the workshop, Ye Bei, oblivious to the outside world, continued his painstaking work. Every blow, every spark brought him closer to his goal, to creating something great. Meanwhile, his companion watched, amazed by the youth's hidden skill. What lies behind this calm? Where do such skills come from? Questions swirled in the observer's mind. Details that seemed incompatible took on new form and meaning in his hands. Then, dipping the blade into the magical mixture, he performed a tempering ritual, preparing it for testing. From the depths of the liquid, a blade emerged, with lightning-like patterns snaking across it, foreshadowing its power. The witness was overcome with admiration. Such beauty and power were rarely seen in this perishing world. Finally, the blade was ready, and a subtle but confident smile appeared on Ye Bei's face. He felt like a true creator, a brilliant mechanic, capable of transforming any material. Hard work demanded a reward, and now modest but desirable dishes were laid out on the table. The girl, exhausted by work, sighed with relief, anticipating a hearty dinner. Her innocent gaze shone with joy at the simple opportunity to have dinner after a long day. But at that very moment, the peaceful scene turned into a nightmare. A rough hand covered her mouth, tearing her from the embrace of safety. Ye instantly realized what had happened and turned around, a dangerous, cold fire flashing in his eyes. Sparks flew like fiery spray as the blade of the future sword took shape under persistent hands. With every blow, with every movement, the tool bit into the metal, carving out perfect lines. Finally, the blade was revealed in all its glory, its steel gleaming and faint green hues gleaming within. "I've only seen this in the movies," the observer exhaled in admiration, not hiding his amazement. Ye, wearing green glasses, nodded intently, preparing for the last and most important step. Energy surged, completing the circuit, and a blinding discharge momentarily illuminated the workshop. The blade came to life with a low roar, and electrical discharges danced across its body. The mechanism crackled, emitting smoke, but it had done its job. The weapon was awakened. "Ye," the fat man exclaimed, his voice a mixture of shock and admiration. Holding the now fully charged sword in his hands, Ye felt its power, ready for battle at the second level. The partner, blinded by the spectacle, could not help but sigh with envy, dreaming of a similar miracle. But that moment of triumph was shattered when he heard, no, felt the desperate cry of his little sister Yue. The workshop disappeared, replaced by an open space where every breath was filled with threat. And there, in the center of this nightmare, they stood, surrounded by enemies, with his fragile sister in their merciless hands. Her pale face, the dried blood on her clothes. This picture burned him from the inside, igniting a hellish flame. Ye's eyes reflected only pure, undiluted anger, promising a quick retribution. One of the kidnappers, holding a knife to her throat, tried to dictate his terms, but his words dissolved into a menacing silence. Ye raised his sword, clicking his tongue briefly. It wasn't agreement, but merely a prelude to the storm. The partner's desperate cry pierced the air, foreshadowing the imminent fight. The sword fell, and the ground exploded in a fountain of dust and energy, dividing the sides with an invisible but deadly line. The partner's scream broke the silence again as green energy consumed his body. He was choking, but rage and pain did not allow him to give in. A whirlwind of chaos passed before me, and a silent sigh caught in my throat. We found ourselves trapped, and every moment seemed like the last in this raging hell. Ye, without wasting a second, raised his blade again, issuing a challenge. A powerful swing of the sword cut through the air, and a new wave of energy rushed towards the enemy. One of the enemies struggled to hold his position, trying to repel the deadly blow. "Where are you running, fool?" our comrade shouted, but we couldn't hesitate for a second. At this moment, Ye mercilessly launched another attack, aiming for the enemy's weak point. His words sounded like a sentence, and I understood, this is not just a battle, this is survival. For failure meant death, not only by the sword, but also at the hands of our own leader. We rushed away, trying to escape the deadly whirlwind and save the girl's life. And then I saw Ye lower his sword, and one of our opponents collapsed to the ground. His eyes were filled with a fierce determination mixed with bloodlust. But then a warning cry rang out, "Brother E, beware." His words were followed by a warning, "Behind you." And then, from the darkness, a whole horde of monsters burst forth, driven only by hunger. "They came running here as if on cue," he exclaimed in panic, looking at the approaching creatures. Ye took up a defensive position, preparing for a new, even more terrible battle. The sword in his hand seemed like his only hope against this endless wave of the living dead. While Ye, a battle-hardened man, was pondering his next move, his partner, in a panic, suggested retreating. But there was no time for doubt, just a moment to make a decision, and Ye rushed forward. His sword, glowing with mysterious green energy, pierced through the living dead. The fat man, watching this bloody ballet, could only breathe out in amazement, hardly believing his eyes. It was a spectacle beyond the ordinary, a display of incredible strength and skill. Suddenly, Fatso's gaze caught sight of two retreating figures, other survivors, disappearing into the horizon. "Brother Yi, they're running, and our sister Yue is with them. We need to catch up with them," he cried desperately. Ye gritted his teeth and quickly gave the order. "Don't be stupid, fatty. Take the car and catch up with them while I hold back the horde." Having realized the full meaning of the order, Fatso rushed with determination towards the armored SUV, recalling days long past. As he got behind the wheel, he took one last look at the fighting Ye, promising to return. The car took off, leaving behind dust and horror, carrying him away from the main battle. The fugitives, initially celebrating their success, suddenly heard the increasing rumble of pursuit. Their faces contorted with fear as they saw the mighty SUV approaching, and with it came anger. With a last desperate effort, they dragged the kidnapped girl into a nearby bus. The fat man, seeing their maneuver, froze in a daze, sensing a trap. A sharp screech of brakes broke the silence as Fat Man's SUV came to a stop in front of an unexpected obstacle. The bus, parked across the road, completely blocked his path, and Fatso realized with horror they were driven into a corner. Sinister laughter came from the bus, predatory and full of mockery. "So it's just Fatso?" one of the bandits said dismissively. "Well, all the better, we'll deal with him now." And so, armed bandits emerged from the open doors of the bus, one of whom cynically thanked Fat Man for his excellent car. The Fat Man waited tensely, feeling the ominous aura thickening around him. A mocking voice ordered him to get out, and a deadly thirst for blood could be seen in the eyes of the bandits. But Fatso was not one to retreat. His heavy sword glowed ominously in response. The bandits only grinned, boasting of their countless murders, but their words did not shake his resolve. With a furious roar, Fatso threw in their faces that they had met their own doom here. And then he brought his blade down, releasing a powerful emerald discharge that split the air. A green wave of energy pierced one of the bandits, throwing him away like a rag doll. The unfortunate man's body crashed into the bus with such force that it twisted the metal and caused a blinding flash. But something caught Fatso's attention. His gaze stopped on a barely perceptible movement. Yibei approached, his shining sword illuminating the way, and his voice echoed in the silence of the night. Without wasting any time, he ordered Fatso to follow, because somewhere nearby, a frightened soul was waiting for help. His eyes were filled with steely determination, and his hand gripped the bloody blade tightly, ready for another battle. With lightning speed, Yibei swung his sword, and the air around him was filled with a green glow. A powerful impact shook the ground, creating a blinding explosion of pure energy. The two shadows, Yibei and Fatty, moved forward, their footsteps echoing under the hidden gazes of the survivors. They appeared as two fearless warriors, their figures silhouetted against the gloomy landscape, radiating menace. But before they could catch their breath, another bandit emerged from the shadows with a sly grin. His hand darted out and the glittering blade flew forward, aiming straight at his opponent. A deadly blade cut through the air, heading straight for Yibei, ready to pierce him through. However, Yibei did not flinch and met the attack with his sword, causing the knife to bounce off with a roar and sparks. Yibei counterattacks, his blade cutting through the darkness, sending streams of pure energy out of the air. The attacker, with a frightened cry, recoiled from the powerful blow, his knife flying powerlessly to the side. Meanwhile, one of the remaining bandits was approached by his accomplice, sarcastically asking if he needed help. But others had no intention of giving up. Burning shells rained down from the sky, trying to reduce Yibei to ashes. Flames instantly surrounded him, but Yibei did not flinch as he engaged the formidable giant in the heart of the fiery trap. His face was full of focused determination as the blade pierced the air again and again, leaving emerald trails in its wake. Flashes of green energy exploded around them, throwing opponents back like puppets whipped by an invisible force. But in the midst of the chaos of the battle, a thunderous shot rang out, piercing the silence of the night. The bullet whistled past Yebei's temple, causing his eyes to widen in anticipation of an imminent threat. And above the battlefield, a new player stood with a cruel grin, holding a pistol in his hand, his words full of cynical praise. He, like the director of this bloody spectacle, invited Yibei to join him, but there was only one purpose behind his words. Yibei listened, his bloodied face expressionless, but his eyes flashed with heavy thought. The villain continued his speech, showering false compliments with only threat and madness. Suddenly, Yibei tensed up. His sword was about to fall again, but something held him back from taking immediate action. Then his gaze fell on the little girl fast asleep in the chair, with the cold barrel of a pistol pressed to her tender head. "She must be very tired," the villain muttered, his smile turning into a grin that foreshadowed something terrible. Yibei looked up at his enemy, realizing the depth of his insidious plan and the desperation of his situation. The man with the pistol chuckled smugly, confident of his victory, because now he had an undeniable trump card. Yibei's insides sank. His little sister Yue was in the enemy's hands, meaning his escape routes were cut off. But even in the face of such hopelessness, a barely noticeable, bitter smile flickered across Yibei's lips, foreshadowing his answer. A sinister grin spread across the opponent's face as he asked if Yibei was willing to sacrifice all of his people without exception. A loud, wild laugh broke the silence, and he opened his arms and greeted Yibei as a great man who would do anything to achieve his goals. Meanwhile, one of his henchmen screamed in panic, pointing out that the enemy not only had superior numbers, but also weapons. Yibei, without taking his eyes off the center of events, coldly said that no one was forcing them to follow him if they didn't want to. The plump man, clutching a flaming blade in his hand, protested, declaring that he had no intention of diving into this murky water. Taking a few steps back, he clearly prepared himself for a fight, shouting something about Yebei not being upset. A look of determination mixed with deep fatigue flashed in Yebei's eyes, reflecting the gravity of the choice ahead. Suddenly, three men in formal suits bowed deeply to Yebei, as if acknowledging his hidden power or role. Accompanied by a measured step, Yebei moved forward, his special blade faintly gleaming in the darkness, and his retinue followed behind him. Night enveloped the massive building where the decisive events were to unfold, adding gloom and mystery to the upcoming confrontation. Inside, on a luxurious carpet, a whole crowd of people, armed with everything they could get their hands on, were waiting for Yebei, while the main antagonist watched the events from above as if it were a performance. His grin, full of malice and anticipation, was so wide that it revealed all his teeth, foreshadowing a cruel game. With a sweeping gesture, he mockingly asked Yebei if there were enough people for his purposes, proudly declaring that he had gathered all the strongest in the area here. Another fit of laughter shook his body as he waved his hand dismissively, as if toying with the fates of those gathered. Finally, he turned to Yebei and asked him directly what he really wanted and what his expectations were. In response, Yebei turned to Luo Xiang with a sly smile, suddenly asking him about the causes of the zombie disaster. Luo Xiang's eyes widened in surprise as he clutched the gun in his hand and asked Yebei again how he knew him and why he thought he knew about the virus. Yebei continued his interrogation, hinting with a sly smile that Luo Xiang not only knew the secret of the infection, but was also hatching plans to create his own gang, the Twilight Dragons. The villain, intrigued by Yebei's insight, let out a chuckle and admitted that he was becoming increasingly interested in him, promising something more. But Yebei only grinned wider, holding a mysterious green glowing ball in his hand, foreshadowing a new round of intrigue and danger. The villain, with a mad laugh, demanded that Yebei reveal all his secrets immediately. Meanwhile, the crowd froze in suspense, waiting to see what else this daring guy would reveal. With a slight grin, Yebei began to outline one of the versions of the virus's origin. According to him, the virus arose from failed experiments and spread around the world through migratory birds and insects. And there was another, more fantastic version. The meteorite that fell to Earth was a carrier of a zombie virus. Yebei glanced around at the assembled group, guessing that Boss Luo must have heard these rumors before he returned to this wilderness. Boss Luo chuckled and admitted that Yebei was right, confirming that he himself was keeping one little secret about the zombie virus. And then two mysterious pearls, glowing with a green phosphorescent light, appeared in his palm. With a wicked smile, he asked if Yebei had figured out how to use these sinister pearls from zombie skulls. He pointed at Yebei and his men, hinting that their glowing weapons were somehow connected to these artifacts. Yebei, without flinching, said with a confident grin that he certainly knew the answer. Boss Luo agreed to the exchange, but first he wanted to see Yebei's mysterious weapon for himself. Yebei looked down at his green glowing sword thoughtfully, weighing his next move. But then Boss Luo, with a sudden, sinister grin, reminded Yebei of his younger sister, who was still here. He pointed the gun at the girl's head, making it clear that he didn't want anything to happen to her. Yebei's face twisted with rage, his eyes narrowing into two slits of hatred. With a heavy heart, Yebei handed his sword to one of Boss Luo's henchmen. However, the massive man who received the weapon froze in amazement at its incredible weight. The sword fell to the floor with a dull thud, and the henchman, breathing heavily, complained to Boss Luo about its colossal weight. Boss Luo just smiled, admitting that today was full of surprises, each one more interesting than the last. The sword fell to the floor with a dull thud, and the henchman, breathing heavily, complained to Boss Luo about its colossal weight. Boss Luo merely smiled, admitting that today was nothing but surprises, each one more interesting than the last. Boss Luo didn't seem to be used to waiting, and with a gun in his hand he was already demanding that Yebei begin this terrifying performance. And Yebei didn't keep them waiting, revealing to them the story of the black pearl that was born in the brains of the infected, like an ominous mark of a new plague. He held this mysterious green sphere in his glove, calling it energetic black gold, capable of accumulating unimaginable power even in lifeless shells. With a concentrated expression, bending over the intricate tangle of wires and microchips, Yebei continued his sinister demonstration. This black gold, he explained, had the uncanny ability to adapt to both living flesh and cold metal. Boss Luo's smile widened as he picked up one of the pearls and asked eagerly, "Does it contain the secret to eternal life?" Yebei's answer sounded like a death sentence. Most of those who dared to taste it only gained the eerie immortality of zombies. The majority? Boss Luo's voice sounded ominous, clearly eager to know about the few who were otherwise lucky. And Yi Bei, raising his hands like a conductor of a harbinger of chaos, promised with a devilish grin that they would now see everything for themselves. Step 1, Yi Bei whispered, his eyes full of anticipation. Activation. As soon as he touched the device, the room burst into a blinding green light, surrounding Yi Bei in a whirlwind of electrical discharges. An energy pulse rolled through the room like a wave, enveloping everyone present and causing them to cry out in fear. With a deafening crack and flashes of flame, the electrical panel could not withstand the load, scattering sparks. In an instant, the light went out, leaving only panicked screams and silhouettes rushing about in the pitch darkness. Boss Lo's face twisted in rage as he aimed into the darkness, wondering if this gold was really capable of such a powerful electromagnetic pulse. Meanwhile, Yi Bei's hand darted towards the mysterious weapon-like device whose green glow pierced the darkness. He swung it sharply, and the blade, which had previously fallen, was now charged with this sinister energy. Boss Lo recoiled, his shirt ripped from the sharp, glowing blow that narrowly missed his flesh. "You brat, are you kidding me?" Boss Luo roared, and a gunshot broke the silence, aimed straight at Yi Bei. But Yi Bei had already taken action, his glowing blade cutting through the air at lightning speed. A green beam pierced through space, reaching Boss Lo and turning his back crimson. "Damn, I was careless," Boss Lo croaked, tasting his own blood. "Dusk Dragon Boss Luo Jing, your end has come." Yi Bei's voice sounded like a death sentence. Memories of the countless victims who had fallen at the hands of this man, whose developments were unparalleled, flashed across his eyes. "Before you have time, I must completely destroy you." With these words, Yi Bei raises his weapon again. A powerful swing and a wave of green energy sweeps away enemies, leaving no chance. Explosions shake the building, merging into a cacophony of destruction and fury. "I must have become a butcher by now," Yi Bei thought as he surveyed the carnage. But his gaze is drawn to the defenseless girl sleeping in the chair, and he gently touches her cheek. She is tied up, her arms and legs are covered in bandages. Yi Bei bends down to check her condition. Through the blood and pain, he feels a surge of new energy, his purpose crystal clear. "Hey, it's me," a familiar voice says, and a plump man wearing glasses appears on the threshold. He looks around the room, covered in blood and engulfed in fire, the beam of his flashlight picking out the lying bodies. Yi Bei picks up the broken pistol from the floor. Something about it caught his eye. His eyes light up as he examines the broken weapon's parts, with a spent shell casing lying nearby. The chaos continues around him, but Yi Bei seems oblivious to anything other than his discovery. "You came just for this gun? I thought you were here to save little Yue. I was even touched," the man asked, perplexed. Yi Bei just smirked, cleverly hiding another pistol in his belt, his gaze full of hidden intentions. What could it be transformed into? Electromagnetic? Or maybe laser? His mind is already generating ideas for improving the weapon he's found. While Yi Bei was pondering his new arsenal, Verzila was enthusiastically sharing his impressions of his brilliant plan with exploding pearls. But then a convulsive sound came from the semi-darkness, drawing their attention to the bloody floor. Yi Bei's gaze instantly slid into the darkness, and his hand instinctively fell onto the handle of his pistol. A girl cowered in fear on the floor in the shadows, and Yi Bei immediately pointed his gun at her. Her piercing pleas for mercy tore through the silence, full of desperate animal horror. In the beam of the flashlight with which Verzila illuminated her figure, she seemed even more fragile and lost. She told of Luoshan's cruelty, of the days of humiliation and torment, begging him to spare her precious life. Yi Bei, without lowering his gun, asked a direct and cold question about Luoshang's secret warehouse. Her willingness to show the way was the only thing she could offer in exchange for salvation. Along the way, she said that her family was in the western region of Anxi, and her only sister had disappeared after the disaster. The report of the elevator not working meant only one thing. They had a long climb up the stairs to the 6th floor ahead of them. Yi Bei merely nodded, agreeing with the need to overcome the height on foot. But on the top floor, something far more disturbing awaited them, a silent battlefield strewn with bodies. Amidst the chaos and blood, faint groans of the wounded could be heard pleading for help. Yi Bei's eyes widened in sudden and terrifying realization. Among the fallen, he recognized Boss Lo, lying lifeless, covered in tattoos. Nearby, in a pool of blood, through the pain, the gaze of one of the survivors caught on a tiny green bead. Yi Bei instantly followed his gaze, and a new shock flashed in his eyes. He picked up the mysterious green bead, realizing with horror that it was the very same energy black gold. Sinister legends flashed through my head about attempts to create an elixir of immortality and those who instead became monsters. Before Yi Bei could react, the mysterious bead jumped into his mouth. A desperate cough racked his body as the bead slid inside, burning his esophagus. An unbearable pain pierced every cell as an unknown energy began to tear him apart from the inside. A thunderstorm raged outside, and every lightning strike seemed like an echo of his unbearable torment. Even Fatso, hearing this terrible cry, shuddered, his gaze involuntarily darting to the heavens. Meanwhile, little Yua, having woken up, looked in horror at the echoes of her recent nightmare. She called out weakly to Fatso, trying to figure out where they were and what had happened. Thoughts of the bandits and Yebei's fate immediately sent her back into a state of panic. At that moment, Yebei entered the room, although battered but clearly alive, clutching a strange sword in his hand. The fat man, breathing a sigh of relief, asked him if he had managed to find anything useful in this abandoned place. At this moment, Fatso couldn't stand it any longer and, pointing his finger, directly asked Yebei about the fate of that mysterious girl. The exhausted Yibei only muttered faintly that she must have slipped away while he was busy searching, and his tired gaze spoke volumes. Fortunately, young Yue, with tender concern, offered her help, convincing her comrades to give Yibei a well-deserved rest, which greatly touched Fatty. But the peace was only a short-lived illusion. The elements were raging outside the window, pouring streams of rain on the world and lighting up the sky with flashes of lightning. An oppressive curtain of water fell upon the lifeless concrete boxes, hinting that only despair awaited them outside. But if the merciless elements raged outside, here, behind the walls, an artificial downpour poured down, offering only apparent cleansing. Under its scorching streams, with his eyes closed, the man tried to wash away the invisible stains of anxiety that had eaten into his very soul. And then, with a sharp opening of his eyes, Yebei realized that the purification had not occurred. The cold tiles underfoot only emphasized the feeling of emptiness, not giving a drop of the desired peace. But suddenly the creaking of the door broke the silence, and a grinning shadow appeared in the doorway, whose voice mockingly whispered words that Yebei never expected to hear. In response to these words, a scream full of horror erupted from the shower stall, demanding the immediate departure of the uninvited guest. But instead of an answer, there was only a cynical grin. This was his home, and he was waiting for the continuation of their joint journey. The girl's eyes flashed with rage and disgust, so this was the true price of his rescue. His laugh, full of superiority, echoed throughout the bathroom, reminding her of her helplessness and that no one but him could help her. He cynically stated that free cheese in this apocalyptic world exists only in mousetraps, hinting at her debt for his generosity. Pushing away from the glass, she cried out as his hand reached out to her, his voice unctuously whispering about surviving together. Her desperate cries echoed in the confined space, calling for help that was nowhere to be found. But the man only laughed, openly mocking her fear and saying that in this world only zombies would hear her screams. Suddenly, a deafening roar broke the silence, and the shower glass shattered into thousands of pieces. Both froze in shock, their eyes fixed on the source of the chaos, where a cold, damp air blew in. The man, forgetting about his victim for a split second, grabbed the knife and recoiled in panic, realizing a far more terrible threat. His eyes widened in horror, reflecting the shock of the invisible enemy that had penetrated their shelter. The girl screamed, clutching the towel to her body, her cries now driven by horror that had eclipsed her previous fear. She peered cautiously out from behind the door, her mind trying in vain to process what was happening behind the shower wall. A nightmarish silhouette burst out of the hole in the glass, its clawed paws already reaching out for the helpless man. The monstrous blow threw his body aside, soaked in rain and blood. A heart-rending scream escaped her lips as she saw her recent tormentor collapse to the floor. The monster froze over the fallen body, emitting a guttural, victorious roar, and the girl watched this, unable to move. Her gaze fell on his disfigured face, where one green eye, full of predatory hunger, glowed in the darkness. And then the numbness lifted, replaced by pure, primal terror that burst from her throat in a piercing scream. The beast, who had recently been a man, was horrified by his own reflection, his new form. He stretched his mangled limbs towards her, trying to convince her that he was still the same inside, but his words sounded like desperate denial. Pain and despair pierced him as he realized the enormity of his transformation. A furious cry erupted from his chest, and his body shook, emitting waves of dark energy. The girl, recoiling from the monster, raised her eyes, full of rage and incomprehension. Through the pain, he began his story, about the injury, about the step to the brink of death, and about the mysterious, energetic black gold that changed him. A look of surprise mixed with fear flashed in her eyes. He was a man, and he had absorbed something so dangerous. He mentioned the name of Ye Bei, the one who called the artifact black gold, mined from the remains of zombies, and said that, standing on the threshold of death, he had no choice but to take the risk. Yibei's name caused an instant reaction in her, like a lightning strike. She jumped up, her voice filled with steel, demanding an answer. "Does he know, Yibei?" Grabbing it, she shook the monster, her scream piercing the air, demanding to know where the one she was looking for was now. He told about Yibei, that he left a trail of blood behind him, having destroyed everyone in the building, and he couldn't get far. Her anger flared up with renewed vigor. She ordered that she be taken to him immediately, promising to deal with the villain. The monster hissed in horror, claiming that Yibei was too strong, but the girl only asked coldly, "Is this a personal score?" The answer was full of pure, all-consuming hatred, coming from her very soul. A heavy silence hung between them, saturated with unspoken anger. Her gaze slid over his contorted body as he tried to formulate a thought. He spoke of the energy that bubbled within him, the power that was now a part of him, but which he had no control over. His exhausted gaze met hers, searching for at least a modicum of understanding. But instead of sympathy, her lips twisted into a creepy, almost insane grin. Her cold hand lay on his twisted flesh like a seal of inevitability. She whispered to him about her hatred for Yebei, wanting his end. And in return she promised to give him everything he could only dream of. A spark of hope, mixed with distrust, flashed in his single glowing eye. The monster's powerful arm gripped her as he swore obsessive words and swore to aid in the murder. Her violet eyes shone with sinister satisfaction, and a victorious smirk played on her lips. But suddenly, the monster shuddered, letting out a painful groan as if it was being torn apart from the inside. Her face was distorted with confusion and fear. What was happening to the one she had just summoned? The creature thrashed in agony, its body expanding, destroying everything around it in a chaotic explosion of energy. Beyond the walls of this nightmare, the world continued to live its rainy, serene life. At this time, in a completely different place, a familiar hand reached for the pistol holster. The hero, surrounded by a mountain of useless supplies, sighed, realizing that there was nothing valuable to be found here. Behind him, glittering with futuristic details, rested an impressive sword, ready for battle. His steady gaze swept over his surroundings, and he made a decision. It was time to leave. They carried away bags of provisions, dissatisfied with their meager weapons, but happy with the abundance of food. But their return was marred by a shocking sight that elicited a cry of horror. His precious car was smashed to pieces, as if it had survived the apocalypse, causing anger and bewilderment. The friends just watched as the owner tried to open the battered door of his baby without success. A hint of a connection between this destruction and the recent battle flashed in his eyes. With a determined look, he ordered his friend to step back, preparing to fix the problem with his own hands. Ibei assessed the extent of the damage, noting ironically that the armored SUV had been transformed into a makeshift convertible. His companion seemed quite pleased, breathing a sigh of relief, as if the adventure he had just experienced had given him a new zest for life. Meanwhile, Ye Bei, with his usual dose of melancholy and concentration, fastened his seatbelt, preparing for a new journey. The girl next to him quietly clutched a stuffed bunny, while the driver confidently said, "Yes, let's go," as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. And so, the car was once again racing along the highway under the bright sun, leaving behind a city wounded by the apocalypse. The driver jokingly noted that now, with such a convertible, the previous tactic of running over zombies at speed would no longer work. But as soon as he said this, they appeared around the corner, withered figures with frighteningly glowing eyes. The tension in the air grew tense again. The driver cried out in surprise, and Yabe only clenched his jaw tighter. In the distance, piercing screams were heard. These were not zombies, but people desperately trying to save themselves. A group of high school students ran down the street, pursued by a horde of the dead, their voices merging into one heartbreaking cry for help. Yabe's gaze slid over the fugitives, and a faint smile of recognition appeared on his face. Old acquaintances, and to his surprise, they were still alive. But their chances were slim. Their legs were giving way from fear and fatigue, and every step was incredibly difficult. One of the boys supported his weakening friend while the others screamed, their voices carried over the roar of approaching death. The zombies were already very close. Their bestial roar foreshadowed a quick end for the unfortunate ones. The girl fell, losing her last strength, and her comrades realized with horror the hopelessness of their situation. The faces of the dead were distorted in anticipation, their lifeless eyes burning with thirst. But suddenly a green beam of energy pierced the air, and Ye Bei, drawing his sword, rushed headlong into the thick of the battle, leaving only a trail of blood behind him. The surviving schoolchildren froze, shocked by this unexpected rescue, their faces distorted with bewilderment and shock. They saw him, Ibe, standing among the fallen enemies, his sword emitting a strange glow. That same confident, slightly arrogant smile appeared on the hero's face again, as if he was just waiting for the right moment to reveal his true power to the world. They saw him, Ibe, standing amidst his fallen enemies, his sword emitting a strange glow. That same confident, slightly arrogant smile appeared on the hero's face once again, as if he were merely waiting for the right moment to reveal his true power to the world. Relief washed over the survivors, and words of gratitude echoed through the tense air. One of them, having recovered from the shock, looks at his unusual weapon with amazement. Ibe responds casually, but immediately turns his attention to their plans, noticing their desperate attempt to escape from the school. They share their hope of reaching the survivors' camp on an island in the middle of the lake, but the journey there, they say, has already cost many their lives. Suddenly, upon seeing Ibe's car, a new, almost insane hope of salvation flashed in their eyes. Hungry and tired, they timidly ask to share at least a crumb of food, because they have not eaten anything since yesterday. Meanwhile, comments from Ibe's companions can be heard from the car, not missing the opportunity to assess the situation and the appearance of his attractive companion. But Ibe's patience runs out, and his sharp cry cuts off all their expectations. He explains that the car is short on space and fuel, but offers food in exchange for their help in one matter. Desperation forces the survivors to agree to any conditions just to get at least some chance. Ibe tasks Fatso, his companion, with explaining to the newcomers their unexpected and possibly terrifying task. The fat man, with a grin, takes this as his moment to shine, preparing to demonstrate something shocking. Ibe points at the approaching zombies, offering them to scavenge the bodies of the enemies after his attack, causing confusion among the newcomers. The fat man, armed with a small shovel, urges them to watch carefully and learn. He deftly opens the skull of one of the defeated zombies, extracting something unusual from inside. With a triumphant look, he shows off the green pearl, explaining that this is precisely their goal. The sight of the recovered pearl horrifies the survivors, and one of the girls falls unconscious from shock and disgust. But Ibe's companion, on the contrary, calmly continues to extract the pearls, assuring the others that it is not so scary. The fat man hands them tools, reminding them to be careful as the danger of zombie bites is still around. While Ibe is still trying to comprehend what is happening, his companion mercilessly deals with a crowd of zombies. Her blade, illuminated by an ominous green light, cuts through the air, leaving behind only a trail of blood and fallen enemies. The rest, though terrified, set about the horrific work of following instructions, extracting mysterious pearls from twisted skulls. 2 long hours pass, and now Fatso, beaming with delight, shows off a bag full of these gruesome trophies. The fat man calls them monsters in amazement, but Ibe, keeping his cool, orders him to distribute the food as agreed. The fat man indignantly asks how Ibe dared to dispose of his supplies without his knowledge. Deep down, Fatso suffers from the very thought of sharing, because every piece is so precious in this harsh world. But a sudden, crushing blow to the armored car interrupts their squabble, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Shocked screams erupt from the survivors, their faces distorted with horror. A monstrous creature, the anomaly, looms before them, its roar tearing through the silence. Ibe is stunned, unable to understand how such a monster could appear in their relatively safe area. He shouts, calling for everyone to retreat immediately before the monster launches another attack. However, the monster is already rushing at Ibe, who dodges and strikes back with his modified sword. The sword blade flashes green again, sending the monster flying. Another powerful blow and the anomaly is sent flying, hitting the ground. At that moment, a blonde girl in a school uniform appears, clapping her hands, her grin ominous. Ibe, I finally found you. Ibe recognizes her, his face contorted in a mixture of shock and rage. The other survivors are also shocked. Headman, are you alive? Li Hochi only smirks, revealing her true goal. She wants to see Ibe die. And pointing at Ibe, she orders the monster to finish him off. Ibe can't believe his eyes, his face distorted with shock and rage. He curses Li Hoji for getting involved with a monster. But there is no time to think. The monster is already rushing into battle, its clawed paw cutting through the air with terrifying speed. Ibe rushes forward with a cry of rage, his sword gleaming, ready to pierce the darkness born of betrayal. In the background, terrified screams can be heard. Strangers watch the unfolding battle in horror, their hearts clenching in fear. Impact. A wave of fire shakes the earth as Ibe's forces collide with the beast's primal might, filling the air with thunder and sparks. Meanwhile, other people nearby look in amazement at the roof of the building where an ominous fiery figure has appeared. This is not just fire, it is flame incarnate, a creature with horns and glowing eyes, whose power seems limitless and destructive. In the distance, a luxurious yacht bobs on the water's surface, a symbol of a serene life and wealth far removed from the chaos on the shore. On her deck, a gentleman is enjoying a cigar, unaware of the approaching threat, his face expressing complete complacency. With a satisfied smile, he accepts the wine from the obliging butler, who praises his master's wisdom. The gentleman announces his insidious plans, intending to continue robbing passing ships in order to stay afloat forever. But suddenly, the idyll is broken by a blinding flash and a deafening explosion that tears one of the yachts to pieces. In panic, the master and butler freeze, their smug masks giving way to horror and incomprehension. Their gaze turns to the sky, where, engulfed in flames, the very same horned creature is rapidly descending. The fire demon, furious and merciless, approaches, its silhouette becoming ever clearer and more threatening. A strangled cry escapes their throats as the realization of mortal danger pierces them to the marrow of their bones. The monster collapses on the second yacht, turning it into a pile of flaming debris, leaving no chance for salvation. The monster's massive, flaming hand claws at the deck, confirming its all-destructive power and intent. And just as suddenly as he appeared, the fire demon appears again on the roof of the building, as if teleporting through flames and smoke. His eyes blaze with fury and his mouth spews streams of fire, foreshadowing further destruction and chaos. Ye Bei stands on the road, his gaze full of horror and bewilderment in front of the new, unknown creature. Thoughts race through his head. An anomaly? Damn, it's even on fire. Next to him, the blonde also looks stunned and scared. She shakes her head, clearly not understanding what kind of creature is in front of them. At that moment, the fiery creature, like a meteor, rushes down, straight at the gray monster. A lightning strike hits his opponent, causing a dull roar. Ye Bei and his companion watch the unfolding battle in horror. The fiery demon gives no respite, clinging to the gray creature, which, bewildered, tries to resist. A whirlwind of flame and destruction rages around them. But the gray monster is not so simple, and the fire demon flies away, hitting nearby objects. He crashes hard into a parked car and barely manages to regain his balance. In a rage, the fire demon spews out a powerful stream of flame. The flame, like a deadly ray, pierces the air, forcing the gray monster to retreat. Suddenly, a desperate cry is heard. A fat man is grieving about his car and, no less importantly, about his food. Ye Bei, unable to bear this farce, shouts at them that it is time to run before it is too late. Ye Bei himself immediately rushes away without waiting for anyone. The girl points desperately at Ye Bei, walking away into the distance, but the gray monster replies that he is tied up in battle. And again, streams of flame burst from the mouth of the fire monster, increasing the chaos. A beam of fire almost hits the frightened girl as it passes by. Then the next charge hits the fugitives, causing them to let out death screams. The girl desperately tries to dodge the scorching flames, almost getting hit. "Brother Yi!" the girl screams, as Ye Bei grits his teeth and drags her away from the fiery trap. Fire rages all around, and the cries of other refugees calling for Ye Bei fill the air. "Damn it, don't be stupid. Find cover," Ye Bei desperately commands, hearing groans and shouts behind him. One of the companions, a large man covered in sweat, asks in panic, "Brother Yi, where should we run?" Ye Bei clicked his tongue in irritation, his gaze flashing in search of some kind of salvation, and then his gaze falls on an underground parking lot, which promises at least temporary shelter. "Let's go down there and wait it out," he decides, and all three rush to the saving entrance. But in their path lies a familiar, flaming, skeletal creature writhing in agony. A new monster covered in spikes approaches him and asks if this creature can speak. The monster's ominous green eyes study the burning flesh as if searching for an answer to its silent question. And from the body engulfed in flames come words full of horror: black, pearl, burl. A. A desperate cry is heard. "And no, I don't want to eat this." The monster's face, distorted with horror and burning from within, screams, "They've gone crazy, a bunch of madmen." A new rage flares up within him, and he promises, "I must finish them all. I will burn them to minutes." The spiky monster seems to understand his pain, calmly replying, "I'm just like you, I understand what it's like." But their dialogue is interrupted by the appearance of a blonde, who mockingly asks if they are going to kiss here. She orders the spiky monster to stop messing around and find Ye Bei before he escapes. The monster immediately replies that there is no need to worry, because he can still smell him and will easily find him. "Are you looking for someone?" another creature asks, then adds that Ye Bei, who understands black gold, might know how to restore them to human form. The words black gold and the return of appearance echo in Ye Bei's mind, causing confusion. But then a girl interrupts the conversation, declaring her desire to join, as if her presence will change something. Elsewhere, in the dark labyrinths of the garage, Ye Bei and his companions move cautiously, hoping that the danger has passed. Suddenly, the world around them shakes. The car flies to the side, and awareness returns. They are not alone. An ominous laugh cuts through the air, and the same monster appears in their path, clearly not having finished its business. His predatory gaze scans his surroundings, searching for prey in the shadows. Now they are cornered, and the space between them and the monster is shrinking. The monster, approaching, reveals its true intentions. It is interested not just in revenge, but in the secrets of black gold. Ye Bei realizes that there is no way back. His gaze becomes firm, and a challenge can be seen in his eyes. He orders the fat man to take the girl away, preparing to take the blow himself, protecting those who are weaker. The fat man, obeying, grabs Yue and rushes away, leaving Ye Bei alone with the looming threat. But the fiery demon does not sleep. His eerie face with empty eye sockets appears again from the darkness. They are trapped, caught between two monsters, and the fat man's desperate cry confirms the hopelessness of the situation. Somewhere in the distance, someone's ominous laughter is heard, foreshadowing a new danger. It's Li Ruoxi, sitting on the car next to the monster, and her words make it clear who is behind all of this. Ye Bei clenched his teeth and said her name, his eyes flashing with rage and determination. He again orders them to hide, realizing that the battle will be deadly and does not want them to get hurt. Under Li Ruoxi's orders, the gray mutant lunges at Ye Bei, its claws aimed for a fatal blow. In response to the attack, Ye Bei quickly drew his sword, the blade of which flashed with an ominous green light. He meets the monster, parrying the blow, and the energy of his blade collides with the monster's power, illuminating the darkness. But before Ye Bei can respond with his blade, a sharp click is heard. It's not a sword, but a gun, which Ye Bei quickly draws, aiming at the enemy. A deafening shot breaks the silence, releasing a charge of destructive energy. But instead of a monster, a wounded girl appears on the ground, with a piercing beam of energy passing through her body. Her cry of pain pierces the silence as the girl clutches her bloody chest. The monster, in turn, recoiled, a silent question frozen in its eerie eyes. What? Ye Bei, without giving himself a second to think, opens fire again, his pistol spewing a hail of bullets. Bullets pierce the monster's body as Ye Bei screams desperately, protecting the wounded woman. And here he is again with the sword, his blade once again flashing with an ominous green light, preparing for another blow. A powerful swing of the blade shakes the monster, throwing it away from the girl. But the monster does not give up. His body is distorted, engulfed in flames. He becomes even more menacing and furious. Ye Bei looks at this with an expression of shock and new determination in his eyes, realizing the danger. The fire monster falls to the floor with a roar, its flames scorching the air around it. From its terrifying mouth erupts a scorching stream of flame, bringing destruction. Ye Bei stands in the middle of the fiery hell, raising his sword, ready to take this terrible blow upon himself. But a quiet squeak comes from around the corner, and Ye Bei sees a small figure peeking out from behind cover. This is little Yue, her eyes full of fear as she whispers the name of her savior. Suddenly, a hatchet flies out from its hiding place, swiftly piercing the air with a whistle. It pierces the flaming monster's head, causing it to recoil in surprise. The giant monster freezes, and another protector appears behind little Yue, exclaiming her name in surprise. Armed with a shining blade, he unleashes a flurry of blows on the enemy, not giving the monster a chance to respond. The green blade, like lightning, pierces the flaming monster, tearing a scorching scream from it. The flame that was his essence scatters into millions of sparks, marking the end of one threat. Ye Bei, his face twisted with determination, does not stop, his eyes burning with righteous anger. Without wasting a second, he turns around and delivers a crushing blow to the second, vile creature. The monster lets out an inhuman scream of pain, its distorted body shaking with each blow. Fury and focus are what drive Ye Bei as he prepares for the next decisive attack. A whistling swing of the blade severs the vile limb, and the monster, deprived of a body part, staggers back. The monster writhes, its flesh and blood flying around as Ye Bei maintains a defensive stance. But then, another hideous creature jumps out of the shadows, attacking from behind, but Ye Bei senses its presence. "You are merciless, Ye Bei," the anomaly growls, realizing the battle is lost, and promises to return before disappearing into the darkness. The two monsters retreat hastily into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of their defeat. Yibei lowers his blade, taking a deep breath, his face showing the fatigue of a deadly fight. At that moment, a worried Yue runs up to him, followed by another ally, loudly addressing him. Little Yu asks about his wounds with concern, but Yibei just waves her off, saying that he just needs to catch his breath. Facing two anomalies at the same time, he says, his voice heavy, is something I didn't expect at all. The big man, trying to comprehend what was happening, asks again, Anomalous? Brother Yi, do you know where they came from? Yibei falls silent for a moment, his gaze becoming thoughtful, as if he were weighing his words. He explains that anomalies are people mutated by black gold, and only a few, with an incredible chance, gain enormous powers, avoiding the fate of zombies. Brother Yi, the big man is surprised again. How do you know all this? And Yi Bei falls silent again, his past remaining a mystery. Conflict erupts in Yi Bei, his gaze lowered, trying to hide the storm inside. The big man, overcome with despair, talks incoherently about food, about home, that he must go back and check on his people. But Yi Bei is unwavering. His profile is carved with determination. He knows the way, and there is no turning back. With his sword slung over his back, he gazes into the distance, toward the gray horizons where a new challenge awaits. The sky opened up, pouring streams of water onto the world, washing away the remnants of hope and plunging everything into despondency. It's all over. The big man's words ring out through the sound of the rain, like a death knell over a dying world. He clutches the bag in his hands, the only trophy from this hell, and mourns his little girl who is beyond help. The underground parking lot, a symbol of their failed rescue, is blocked, depriving them of their last chance for an easy exit. In this dark hour, a little girl, trying to maintain a shred of logic, offers a choice, shelter, or the road. Yi Bei looks at her, and at this moment she suddenly remembers that she knows this place, doesn't she? A spark of hope flashes in her eyes. She has been here before, where her father's old friend lived. It's not far, she says, pointing towards the mountains. Daddy used to take me here to play. The big guy asks about his friend with doubt in his voice, but the girl only smiles awkwardly, calling him a little strange. She becomes animated as she describes the tall building, impenetrable to zombies, and the many computers he is fascinated with. The big guy chuckles. A computer club? We need a supermarket now, not this, his practicality prevailing. The girl, slightly confused, hastily agrees, trying to please her companions. Suddenly, from behind the dim veil of rain, a creepy creature appears, its eyes glowing with an ominous green fire. A zombie, then another, then a whole horde, begins to advance, and the big guy screams in terror. But Yibei only gripped the hilt of his sword tighter, his gaze becoming sharp. Then we will advance by fighting. And, in the blink of an eye, a powerful blow cuts through the first monster, turning it into a mindless mass. Bloody rain irrigates the earth, and the bodies of the fallen only multiply, becoming food for terrible creatures. Among them, Ye Bei, who had taken the form of a monster with wild white hair, towered over the scraps of flesh. With a hissing sound, he tears a mysterious green sphere full of unearthly energy from the fallen body. This black gold should be enough. The thought flashes gloomily through his mind as his gaze is directed into the distance. With a swift leap, he soars into the air, leaping over rooftops, but his mind is tormented by visions. An image flashes through his mind, a fiery monster with a bone mask, personifying her possible fate. This vision is frightening, because on the balcony he sees not his Josie, but the terrifying creature that she can become. Josie! Josie! A piercing cry bursts from his chest, a call full of pain and despair. And while these images rage in his thoughts, the real Josie lies on the bed, bleeding, her strength waning. Ibe leans over her, his voice bitter. Ruokshi, I brought you the black gold as you asked. Through the pain, Josie demands, her gaze full of despair. Give me everything. Are you sure you want to eat this? Comes the cautious question, for the price of such a cure could be terrible. But Josie doesn't hesitate. Her hand is outstretched, and her cry is full of boundless determination, drowning out all doubts. Yibei's face twists into a grimace, as if the unbearable truth of the upcoming choice was revealed to him. He plunges into this vision again, sees himself and Josie, already changed, talking on a rainy night. She ate it? Ibe asks the ghost of the future, to which the fiery Ruoji only replies, she doubts it. I saw others being forced to eat these black pearls, and the consequences were horrific, shares the transformed Josie, recalling her journey. I don't want her to die, Ibe says, his voice filled with genuine concern for Ruokshi in her human form. Even though I cauterized her wounds, he continues, as if sharing his heaviest burden, she will die without special treatment. His gaze is fixed on the rainy sky, the realization falling on him like a heavy burden. There seems to be no choice. Meanwhile, in a completely different part of this cursed world, a fiery creature offers a terrifying solution: embrace mutation, become one of them, to forever rid themselves of the fear of zombies. A promise of boundless power and vengeance erupts through the flames, echoing across the devastated world. But another, dark, monstrous figure notices a critical flaw in her newfound form, reminding her of the fragility of existence. A moment of doubt flashes across her fiery eyes as the truth about her non-regenerating wounds becomes clear. However, a common desire to return to human form and the secret of black gold unite them in an effort to extract it from a common enemy. And in this forced union, the fiery creature, like a ghost of the past, pronounces its name, Jo Bo. The dark giant, extending a clawed paw, replies, sealing this terrible pact, Wang Sheng. And in the distance, under the relentless rain, the reality of survival is revealed in each blow to the next living abomination. It is Ye Bei, his cloaked figure blending into the rain as the blade's green glow cuts through the darkness, leaving behind only fragments of the nightmare. Every breath, every exhalation is difficult for him, but an unbending determination still burns in his tired eyes. The comrade's voice cuts through the noise of the downpour, expressing deep concern for Ye Bei, whose pale face betrays extreme exhaustion. But Ye Bei just brushes off his worries, trying to pull himself together, and his gaze is already searching for a way to escape, asking Yue about the purpose of their grueling journey. Little Yue, pointing ahead, paints a hazy image of hope in her mind: a tunnel, a rise, and finally a shelter that seems within reach. In response to the promise of a close goal, Ye Bei only grunted briefly, his eyes full of unwavering determination but every muscle betraying incredible tension. Without a moment's hesitation, he spots the saving wreckage, transforming it into a makeshift vessel to protect his fragile companion from the raging elements as they continue on their journey. The hours merge into one endless storm where every second is a battle for survival. In the icy grip of the flood, under the incessant rain, Ye Bei and his companions, covered with scraps of cloth, stubbornly cling to the fragile raft, their eyes full of exhaustion but not despair. With each push, the raft rocks on the waves, carrying them further from the light and closer to the ominous shadow. The oppressive darkness of the tunnel closes in around me, and fear paints terrifying pictures. Could it be that the depths now hide something worse than just sunken memories? Her gaze, full of chilling horror, glides over the dark water, as if seeking confirmation of the unspoken nightmares that lurk in the abyss. Ye Bei gasps for air, his lungs burning with effort, and the cold water tries to pull him into the abyss where fears whisper. The boat shudders, and a desperate cry of "Brother E" echoes across the water, foreshadowing imminent disaster. The wave washes over him, engulfing his body, and the girl's screams dissolve in the noise of the water, like the last ray of hope. But reality breaks through the dream, transporting us to a world where pouring rain lashes against the glass of city buildings. The storm has dragged on, and under its cover, shadows glide across the rooftops, discussing the endless downpours that are flooding the city. One of them, with a mane of silver hair, turns to her companion, planning a conversation that does not bode well. But before the words can escape, a second figure rides on the ground, shrouded in an ominous purple glow. Fear distorts the monster's features as he realizes what is happening, breathing out the name Josie with a hint of horror. Her scream tears through the air, her eyes glowing an eerie green as the power tears through her from within, transforming her into something else. A new form is born from the flames, and an orange entity with a skull for a face asks, "What is this madness?" An explosion of purple energy shatters the building fragments like fragile toys under the onslaught of an invisible force. Once again, we see Ye Bei, whose body is thrown to the ground and whose hair is tightly clutched by someone's hand. A golden-haired woman, surrounded by silent guards, bends over him, demanding answers about his missing comrade. Her gaze is piercing, and her voice is a command that brooks no argument: answer immediately. But Ye Bei, although wounded, looks into her eyes with wild fury, challenging and warning her to stay away. Her patience is running out, and the promise that things will now be good sounds like a harbinger of new pain. Ye Bei's head suddenly plunges into the water, and splashes fly in all directions, leaving behind only ripples on the surface. Underwater, he struggles desperately for every breath of air, bubbles rising to the surface as evidence of his struggle. Suddenly, his eyes open, and the ceiling of an unfamiliar room appears before him, blurring the boundaries between sleep and reality. A groan breaks through the fog of consciousness as Ye Bei clutches his head, trying to comprehend what just happened. His gaze slowly focuses, studying the ceiling. Next to him, calmly, as if nothing had happened, the same girl, still bandaged, sleeps. But then her eyelids fluttered, and she slowly raised her head with a groan. She happily exclaims that Brother Yi has finally woken up, to which he only nods briefly. He tries to figure out where they ended up, and the girl quickly explains that this is the house of an old friend of her father. A large man enters the room with a tray, breathing a sigh of relief. "Yebei, you slept for a whole day." But Yebei doesn't seem to be thrilled with his presence, to which the man indignantly states that they dragged him here with all their might. Yebei just frowned, his gaze full of disbelief and unanswered questions. And then, out of nowhere, another one appears, older, admitting that he himself does not understand how they got here. He is perplexed as to how the trio, a student, a fat man, and a girl, were able to pass by the hordes of the dead, and he himself would not have believed it if he had not seen it with his own eyes. The girl, seemingly unaware of the growing tension, joyfully greets Grandpa Zheng, while Yebei looks at her with bewilderment. She recalls how they pulled Yebei out of the water when he was losing consciousness, and didn't know what to do next. Then Grandfather Zheng found out about them and came to pick them up, which allowed them to get to a safe place. Yebei seems to have guessed what exactly his grandfather saw and tensely asks him about it. The old man, frozen in a daze, recalls how Yebei chopped up zombies like vegetables with his strange weapon. Yebei, trying to get up, expresses gratitude for saving him, but immediately demands that his weapon be returned to him, refusing to explain anything. But his body still didn't obey, and he fell exhausted while the girl rushed to his aid. The man remarks that swinging that sword must have taken a lot of effort from Yebei, and he only winces in pain. Grandpa Zhang seemed to understand more than he was saying, a slight smile playing on his face. He introduces himself as Dr. Zhang and invites everyone to his research institute, where he has lived and worked since the beginning of the pandemic. Yebei can't believe his ears. Standing in front of him is Dr. Zhang Han himself, whose name he knows well. The image of the legendary scientist who was the first to study zombies and gave the name Energy Black Gold pops into the guy's head. Could it be that this old man, who so simply introduced himself as Grandpa Zhang, is that very same world figure? The shock gives way to the realization of the scale of this meeting. However, Grandpa Zhang, smiling modestly, quickly dispels Yebei's suspicions, calling his name only a made-up nickname. But his interest in Yebei's mysterious weapon is absolutely real, and he asks for permission to study it in the name of saving humanity. Yebei decides to check whether the person in front of him is really the great scientist or just a namesake. With a sly smile, he promises to show something much more interesting than just weapons. "A living zombie," Yebei declares, and the old doctor's eyes light up with genuine excitement. Deep within the institute, a heavy metal door slides open, revealing a path into the depths of secret research. Grandpa Zhang, full of enthusiasm, leads everyone to the place where the weapon he so desired is already waiting. There, on the table, lies Yebei's sword, a weapon that the doctor had already examined but not touched. Yebei lifts his blade with ease, and the scholar's eyes reveal genuine admiration. The guy assesses the situation, noting the high-quality conditions for scientific research. Dr. Zhang, amazed, asks if Yebei created this miracle himself, and he casually confirms. The old scientist's delight reaches its peak. He begs Yebei to reveal the secret of the weapon's creation. But Yebei is adamant the secret will remain a secret, otherwise his services in capturing zombies for research will become meaningless. The only way to solve the mystery is through daily treats, something Yebei openly teases the angry scientist about. Meanwhile, Yebei's profile flashes on the monitor screen. The information about his past seems to be completely at odds with his current abilities. And outside, under the endless rain, the world continues to slowly descend into chaos, full of wandering dead. The chaos outside is omnipresent, a constant reminder of the impending horror. But inside this shelter, through the monotonous sound of the rain, the voice of an old man greeting Yue is heard. The girl searches intently for survivors, her fragile shoulders bearing the weight of hope. Dr. Zhang Han, his face full of worry, admits that his video surveillance is powerless against the endless sea of zombies where Yue's father is lost. Yue, trying to dispel his sadness, smiles, naively believing that everything will be fine with her father because Dr. Zhang is such a kind person. But the old man can't shake off his worry, his gaze sliding to the two companions who brought Yue here. He sees Yebei, a young student whose hands work with such confidence on complex mechanisms, too skilled for his age, with a glint in his eye that could only belong to a predator. And a second, seemingly simple fat man also causes Dr. Zhang Han to have an inexplicable feeling of suspicion. But suddenly, as if hearing someone else's thoughts, the fat man turns around sharply, accusing the old man. He points to Dr. Zhang Han, wondering how such a huge research institute came to be under the supervision of just one person. Indeed, there were huge fuel tanks scattered around outside, and endless fields of solar panels providing energy. Dr. Zhang Han proudly displays the interior, countless supplies of food, clothing, and everything one might need to survive. But his pride gives way to righteous anger when he sees the lack of understanding in the eyes of his guests. In despair, he screams, explaining that all this is not madness but the result of his prophetic premonition and many years of preparation for the day of judgment. He accuses them of ingratitude because they use everything he has created and dare to judge him, forgetting that his true goal is the salvation of all mankind. The fat man responds with angry accusations of invading his privacy, but Dr. Zhang Han snaps. Without his intervention, they would have simply died. Yue, horrified, tries to stop the escalating argument. And so, in this tense moment, the fat man does something shocking, stabbing himself in the neck with a syringe containing unknown contents. Yebei, dumbfounded, immediately rushes towards him, but the fat man, with icy calm, only says, "Don't move." Yebei, shocked by what happened, can barely squeeze out the question of why they did this to him, to which Fatso calmly replies, "I needed your blood." He continues, with a grim look, predicting that the first wave of zombie mutations will soon begin, and there is less and less time left to prepare. The atmosphere grows tense with each passing second, and his words that they must be prepared sound like an ominous warning. The old man and the fat man exchange glances, their faces expressing complete bewilderment. Zombies? Mutate? Somewhere behind us, a girl whose name we don't yet know froze at the monitors, as if sensing an impending catastrophe. Outside, as if in response to their worries, the heavens opened up, pouring down a downpour on the city that hid something far more terrible. And here it is, the first confirmation of their worst fears. The streets are flooded, and hordes of clumsy but deadly creatures roam through the murky water. Feng, his blonde bangs wet from the rain and sweat, looks at the scene with horror, his eyes wide open. These creatures are more than just mindless monsters. Their glassy eyes now glow with an eerie green light, and their jaws are twisted into a predatory grin. Feng lets out a low, strangled groan, his face contorted with despair and growing panic. This place is already surrounded by zombies. There's nowhere else to go, Feng cries out desperately, kneeling in front of the remaining surviving students. His comrades, just as frightened as he, can only watch helplessly, and one of the girls covers her face with her hands, unable to bear what she sees. One of the students, his head bowed, bends over the lifeless body of a girl, covered with a sheet, another victim of this apocalypse. They all sit there, soaking wet and exhausted, and Feng continues, his voice shaking with despair. "There's no food in this building, we're all going to die here!" But then his gaze changes, and he says, as if reaching for the last straw, "No, there is one more option." In his open palm lie 4 strange, dark green balls, from which emanates an incomprehensible but tangible power. Feng's neighbors, once again stunned, stare at these mysterious spheres, filled with a premonition of something unusual. Feng explains that he once helped Tiebei extract similar ones from zombie skulls, and then hid a few for himself. He remembers hearing the roar of a monster who, after eating a black pearl, turned into a monster, and now he asks himself, maybe if I eat one of these, I can do it too. This idea horrifies the others, and they look at Feng with undisguised fear, realizing the madness of his intention. But Feng did not back down from his crazy idea, convinced that only the strength of the monsters would give them a chance to break through the siege and survive. Suddenly, Ye Bei, horrified by what he saw, screamed and pointed at something in the distance. Outside the shelter's walls, a thunderstorm raged, and an ominous purple vortex swirled in the black sky like a harbinger of the end. The faces of everyone nearby were distorted into grimaces of genuine horror, realizing the full power of the approaching catastrophe. The rain fell upon their shelter with a furious force, as if the sky itself were mourning the fate of humanity. And deep within the depths of the complex, despite the apocalypse outside, work continued. Welding sparks flew, creating something new and unknown. It was Brother Ye, whose gaze was filled with grim determination as he lowered his welding mask, once again immersing himself in his mysterious work. He disappeared into his workshop for several days, and none of the survivors knew what exactly this brilliant but silent inventor was creating. Only Grandpa Zhang, the old sage of their group, and the fat man were worriedly discussing his words about the new equipment against the mutated zombies. The fat man couldn't help but panic, imagining that if all the zombies became as terrifying as the 2 monsters they had already encountered, then their end was inevitable, since there weren't even any decent weapons here. Grandpa Zhang irritably retorted that he was building a shelter, not a fortress, but the fat man insisted that without protection, they would become nothing more than meat on a cutting board. In the midst of their argument, a little girl burst into the room, desperately calling out to Grandpa Zhang. Her eyes were full of tears and hope as she, out of breath from running, reported that she had seen her father on one of the surveillance cameras. Without a moment's delay, the men rushed after her, asking about her father's whereabouts. Their hearts sank with a premonition of danger. In the control room, the girl pointed to the screen, showing a recording of her father wandering along a shopping street in the Western District. A chilling picture opened up on the monitor, a flooded street teeming with the dead, and among them a lone figure in a dark cloak. The zoom zoomed in. It was her father, but the strangest thing was that he was calmly walking among the zombies, who seemed not to notice him. The survivors caught their breath. How could he not be converted, and why did the hordes of the dead ignore his presence? The cloaked figure, shrouded in rain and ominous mystery, slowly moved away, leaving behind only unanswered questions. The observers in the control room could only stare at the screen, trying to understand the inexplicable, until the mysterious stranger disappeared from sight. Yue's voice, filled with anxiety, echoed throughout the cold room. But there was a smile on Uncle Fatty's face. The main thing was that her father was alive, despite all the mysteries. Grandfather Zhang, carried away by his calculations, was already constructing theories about this man's extraordinary ability to elude the undead. Yue tried to bring him back to reality, but the old scholar merely waved her off, admitting that he was preoccupied with his thoughts. Soon, his face darkened as the pouring rain threatened to cut off the only way to his father by flooding the western tunnel. The hope that had just flared up began to fade in Yue's eyes. Then Uncle Fatty suggested turning to Ye Bei, since he had probably already created something incredible. The thought of this made Ye Bei shudder, his face contorted in sudden displeasure. He stood with his arms crossed, his gaze sharp as a blade, while Yue shifted unsteadily from foot to foot. His words, spoken with undisguised irritation, made Yue lower her eyes, her face showing bitter disappointment. Uncle Fatty tried to reason with Ye Bei, but he just waved it off, not wanting to hear any consolation or advice. Rage blazed in his eyes, and his jaw was clenched tightly. Uncle Fatty just blinked in surprise, trying to understand the reason for such tension. But then something incredible flashed in the light of the lamps, a futuristic sword and pistol, emitting a mysterious glow. Ye Bei, watching Uncle Fatty's delight, indifferently confirmed that he had poured their shared blood into this weapon, making it a part of them. Fatso's hand gripped the handle tightly, feeling an unprecedented power. "Incredibly light," he exclaimed, asking if this weapon was an extension of Ye Bei, just as fast and deadly. Ye Bei explained that to wield this weapon, one must imagine the power flowing into it, otherwise it will consume the wielder. Fatso's face lit up with a wide smile, anticipating new power. He asked if the gun was made on the same principle, and Ye Bei nodded, confirming his guess. Ye Bei watched him with some caution, but Fatso's thoughts were already far away, anticipating the power in his hands. He couldn't wait to test this power and, laughing loudly, announced his intention to begin training immediately. Without a second's hesitation, Fatso rushed away, clutching a new weapon in both hands. Quickening his pace, he ran out into the street, where the first drops of rain were already beginning to drum on the asphalt. But nothing could stop him. The weapon in his hand pulsed with green energy, ready for battle. In a fit of unbridled delight, he raised his pistol, shouting that this weapon was capable of piercing the soul itself. And his words were not empty. A blinding green beam shot up into the sky, cutting through the rainy shroud like a lightning bolt. The power that flowed through him was so overwhelming that Fatso threw his head back, letting out a cry of pure ecstasy. His laughter echoed through the rainy street as he spread his arms and declared Ye Bei's creation to be simply amazing. The green light of energy pulsed, promising destruction to everything the blade touched. And he, exulting, threw himself into the rainy whirlwind, declaring that with this weapon he could now conquer any obstacle. The swings of his twin blades cut through the air, creating emerald arcs that could split reality itself. But a sudden shout came from somewhere deep within the complex. Someone was clearly not happy with such reckless jubilation. Ignoring the disgruntled voice, Fatso merely threw back his head and burst into such laughter that it seemed to shake the heavens themselves. Under this uncontrollable laughter, driven by an invisible determination, he deftly pulled on his combat boots, striking the hem of his massive jacket. And now standing at full height under the cold streams of rain, with two deadly weapons in his hands, Fatso loudly declared that let them come, and he would show how Old Man Zhao crushes enemies. Through the veil of rain that was breaking against the glass, his face, distorted with laughter, turned into a sinister mask, and from his lips came a short, peremptory order to those who froze inside, awaiting his return. Inside, under the weight of the oppressive silence, stretched to its limit, only a timid child's voice dared to interrupt the wait, asking about the fate of Brother Zhao, to which the stern old man Zhao, without looking up from his work, only grimly replied that he was not worried about it, only how much longer all this bravado would last. And while old man Zhao frowned with disdain, Ye Bei felt a cold terror gripping him with all his guts, understanding the true meaning of the order that had just been heard from behind the wall. The control tower broadcast alarming news. The route to the west was blocked by a flood, leaving only a road through the mountains teeming with the dead, where every step was an invisible threat. But instead of obeying, Brother Zhao, without holding back his rage, demanded that Yue go with him, to which old man Zhao responded only with an angry grumble. And so, in the pouring rain, with a blade glowing green in his hand, Brother Zhao rushed forward, straight towards the unknown. The raindrops mixed with the sweat running down his face, revealing the nervous tension that was gripping him from within. From behind the curtain of the downpour, a crowd of monsters suddenly appeared right in front of him, their lifeless bodies slowly but surely making their way closer. With each passing second their numbers grew, and a hungry howl echoed over the wet grass, foreshadowing an imminent battle. But Brother Zhao only chuckled, tightening his grip on the artifact that Ye Bei himself had created, and a flash of determination flashed in his eyes. One sharp swing, and a green light split through the air, the harbinger of a swift and merciless attack. The blade pierced the first monster's flesh with ease, spraying blood and contaminated energy. Intoxicated by the battle, Brother Zhao laughed jubilantly, calling on more opponents, confident in his invincibility. However, the next moment his triumphant grin wavered, replaced by a puzzled expression. An ominous bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, and a distant rumble reached him, foreshadowing something far greater than zombies. Nevertheless, he continued to chop, his blade cutting through the air, leaving behind only piles of fallen bodies. The movements were quick and precise. Each blow found its target, and now several monsters had fallen under his onslaught. The fallen creatures lay around him, and he stood in the midst of this chaos, breathing heavily, but not broken. He looked up, his voice filled with despair and hope, addressing those watching him from afar. The rain intensified, turning into a downpour, and on the horizon, in the west, a deadly whirlwind swirled. Meanwhile, inside the shelter, old man Zhao, looking at the screens distorted by interference, sternly warned that the danger had reached level 6 and ordered them to return immediately. But Brother Zhao merely waved his hand in annoyance, saying that even Ye Bei's artifact was powerless against the raging elements, and apologized to Yue that saving her father would have to be postponed until better times. Yue's eyes dimmed with disappointment as old man Zhao leaned over her, insisting that his decision was correct, and she only quietly confirmed it. Yue, exhausted, slowly walked through the downpour towards the massive gates, which now seemed like an insurmountable barrier. But suddenly a sharp beep sounded in the laboratory, and an alarming red indicator began to flash on the instrument panel. Old man Zhao turned around abruptly, his gaze meeting Yue's frightened face, who was standing behind him. It turned out that Fatty Zhao, without waiting for anyone's help, had already dealt with the problem, even though his initial plan to save Yue's father had failed. Instead, at Ye Bei's request, he brought back a live zombie, a hideous, writhing creature with eyes glowing green. Old man Zhao's eyes widened in shock and disbelief when he realized what was behind the gate. "Stay where you are," he shouted, jumping up and rushing outside, ignoring Yue's bewilderment. He rushed towards Fatty Zhao and the unconscious body lying at his feet, clearly disagreeing with this decision. Crouching over the crippled creature, old man Zhao was amazed at its vitality, wondering what fueled this monstrous will to live. Despite the shock, old man Zhao still praised Fatty Zhao, recognizing him as a man of his word, even though he fulfilled his promise in a rather peculiar way. A Yue, watching them from the inside, was finally able to smile, seeing a glimmer of hope in this crazy situation. Meanwhile, Ye Bei, surrounded by sophisticated equipment, was preparing for his own no less dangerous experiment. His gaze was focused and determined as he tested the performance of the newly created mechanical prosthesis that would become his new power. Somewhere in the city, under an unnaturally bright beam of light, hundreds of people moved through the streets, their steps devoid of meaning. They were zombies, their gazes fixed on the sky, and their eyes glowed with an ominous green fire. A discordant chorus of groans and wheezes echoed through the deserted streets as they continued their mad ritual. Suddenly, the green light in one of their eyes changed to crimson, and his body began to contort in terrible agony. His skin cracked, his muscles tore, turning him into a monstrous version of himself, and blood sprayed everywhere, infecting others. One by one, like a chain reaction, the ranks of ordinary zombies began to mutate, tearing themselves apart under the influence of an unknown force. Now something different appeared before us. A grotesque monster with deathly pale skin and ominously blazing red eyes. This monster, clinging to the walls with incredible dexterity, quickly crawled up the residential building while its relatives swarmed below. On one of the balconies, an innocent child, Xiao Ming, looked out, his eyes shining with naive curiosity, not yet aware of the horror approaching him. Suddenly, a huge clawed paw crashed down on the parapet, shattering the concrete like fragile glass. The monster, towering over the balcony, stared at the child, whose only word was a puzzled, "Oh?" Inside the apartment, Xiaoming's father, absorbed in household chores, was trying to open a can of food, feeling an inexplicable uneasiness. But then a chilling scream pierced him, and the man, in a panic, dropped everything and rushed from the spot, calling for his wife and son. "Darling, Xiaoming?" A heartbreaking image appeared before his eyes. The monster was tearing his family apart, blood was soaking the floor, and only a dull, desperate groan escaped from his throat. Meanwhile, even more of these creatures, agile and ruthless, climbed the walls, capturing floor after floor. Sharp claws pierced the window glass, and shards fell inside with a nasty ringing sound, opening the way into seemingly safe dwellings. Panic gripped the residents as a monster burst into one of the apartments, causing people to scream in horror. "A, monster." Elsewhere, people were running around in panic, one person shielding another from the deadly clutches, their screams echoing through the corridors. The hideous creatures of chaos stalked the survivors through the corridors, leaving them no chance of escape. The young students ran without looking back, their faces distorted with pure, primal fear, realizing that their world had collapsed. One of the monsters caught up with the girl, her eyes widened in unbearable horror in anticipation of imminent death. But at that critical moment, a sudden flash of white and blue pierced the air, meeting the monster with a powerful blow. A graceful yet deadly hand, glowing with pale skin and blue patterns, swept out in dynamic motion. A sharp claw sank straight into the monster's head, tearing through the flesh and releasing streams of dark blood. The rescued students turned around, shocked and stunned, their fear giving way to bewilderment at the inexplicable intervention. A new creature, graceful and deadly, stood over the fallen monster, whose life was fading in a pool of blood. And this mysterious savior, with eyes glowing with green fire, held in his hand a small red pill, as if hinting at a much deeper truth hidden from us. Ye Bei and his companions were filled with terror, their eyes full of unanswered questions as chaos unfolded around them. Meanwhile, under a deceptively peaceful sky, somewhere in the city, a new chapter of the apocalypse was unfolding. Hundreds of people fled, their screams and stomps echoing through the streets, foreshadowing the inevitable. They were everywhere, their empty, glowing eyes scanning the surroundings for victims, and their distorted mouths emitting only eerie groans. And above this nightmare, like the conductor of the apocalypse, stood a young girl with two monstrous creatures on her sides, looking at the running crowd with icy calm. One of these creatures, engulfed in flames, seemed oblivious to the panic below, while its owner noted the strange coherence in the movements of the mindless hordes. A barely noticeable but meaningful smile played on her lips, as if she knew something inaccessible to mere mortals. The purple glow of her hand spoke of power, and her words spoke of the purpose for which she had endured so much torment, to find Ye Bei. The monster seemed to be reporting that Ye Bei had taken refuge in the research institute that had been converted into a shelter, and was eager to fight, ready to break through there alone. But in her eyes, blazing with violet light, there flashed another, deeper obsession, a thirst for more than just death. She couldn't let Ye Bei fall so easily. Her hatred demanded a personal retribution, slow and painful, capable of satisfying her dark soul. Meanwhile, the army of the dead, led by an invisible force, continued its advance, approaching the shelter. Nearby, near an armored car, a portly man with glasses and a frightened girl clutching a stuffed rabbit suddenly found themselves at the epicenter of an escalating nightmare. An alarm pierced the air, causing the man to anxiously contact Dr. Zhang, trying to understand the cause of the sudden danger. The old man, Dr. Zhang, shouted out the impending disaster, demanding that the girl be returned to a safe haven immediately. CCTV cameras confirmed his words. A huge horde of undead was gathering throughout the city, their numbers growing with every second. And they were everywhere, out of nowhere, as if the earth itself was giving birth to them to devour the world of the living. The man, stunned by the scale of the threat, could barely comprehend what he had heard, trying to clarify how large this large group was. Dr. Zhang's answer, which sounded like a death sentence, shocked both of them. There were more than 1,000 of them, a whole army of the dead. Having come to a bitter conclusion about his fate, the man could not know that they were not the last survivors, but that their misfortune was the result of someone's mortal insult and thirst for revenge. Dr. Zhang, watching the events on the screens, spoke to someone invisible, redirecting them to the young Ye Bei. Meanwhile, Zhao Han, a massive man in camouflage, hurried forward, sensing impending disaster. His voice was filled with despair as he shouted to Ye Bei, informing him of the approaching 1,000 dead. Ye Bei, immersed in his calculations, merely nodded, confirming that he was already aware of the terrible news from Dr. Zhang. But his mad laughter only sounded like panic, because the question of what to do with such a horde remained unanswered. Ye Bei, however, remained glued to the screen, intensely considering his options, his eyes filled with concentration. Zhao Han couldn't believe his ears. Was he really the only one facing off against an entire army of the dead? Ye Bei reiterated his warnings, admitting that even he did not expect such a rapid development of events and such a scale of a disaster. There was a hidden hope in his words that Dr. Zhang, with his intelligence, would find a way out of this hopeless situation. Zhao Han, burning with rage and despair, felt how precious time was passing, and there was still no solution. In response to his call, there was only silence, interrupted by the soft tapping of Ye Bei's keys. Feeling abandoned, Zhao Han decided to act alone, relying only on his own strength. With a determination that concealed deep fear, he began his climb up the spiral staircase. Every step echoed dully, bringing him closer to the inevitable. And so, having reached the top, he looked down, and horror gripped him from within. Thousands of the dead filled the horizon like a moving sea, their inhuman presence felt even from a distance. His scream was drowned out by the realization of the scale of the threat. There were not just a lot of them, there were too many of them. Despair gave way to furious determination. This horde must not be allowed to reach the last refuges. Dr. Zhang and the girl on the monitor watched his crazy decision in horror, not understanding his motives. But Zhao Han was already behind the wheel, his eyes shining with determination, ready to defy the inevitable. Like a cry from the soul, her voice, full of despair, echoed through the walls of the bunker. But Zhao Han had already broken free, the car roaring, obeying his will. His crazy smile was a mixture of excitement and the irreversibility of the decision he had made. And ahead, through the misty veil, loomed a countless sea of the dead. The jeep raced forward, cutting through the green grass, straight into the thick of danger. He held a futuristic weapon in his hand, ready to unleash it on them. A powerful, aimed shot capable of causing destruction. The first blow landed right in the center of the horde, tearing flesh and scattering shadows. A wave of energy blew the dead away, and Zhao Han, intoxicated by the battle, laughed at the power of his weapon. He continued his dance of death, turning the horde to dust with each new volley. Again and again the green light flashed, destroying the enemies one after another. But Zhao Han wasn't the only one watching this carnage from above. She, with eyes glowing with violet light, towered over the battlefield like a priestess of doom. Seeing such a powerful weapon, she admitted that the situation was more difficult than expected. However, this only added a dangerous glint to her gaze, foreshadowing new trials. Zhao Han, despite his prowess, felt the growing tension of the battle. Countless waves of the dead continued to advance, their bodies flying into pieces. He fired without stopping, trying to contain the onslaught, unleashing a hail of energy. The car rushed through the horde, leaving only charred remains behind. But supplies were running low, and the enemies seemed inexhaustible, causing him anger and despair. Suddenly, the earth shook, and a powerful blow toppled their steel bastion. The girl's terrified scream broke the silence, calling out to Zhao, her only hope. The car flipped over, turning into a flaming trap, but there was no time to panic. From the burning rubble, blazing with his own rage, Zhao emerged, grabbing his weapon. His gaze, despite the pain, burned with unbending determination and righteous anger. The cause of the crash appeared before him, a monstrous silhouette woven from flames. This was no ordinary creature, but a creature of nightmares, with a skull instead of a face and horns emitting a hellish glow. "Your grandfather, you dare attack me from behind?" His voice thundered, challenging death itself. "This time, I'm not afraid of you. Take that," Zhao said, aiming his weapon, emitting green energy. A bright beam pierced the air, but the fiery creature only staggered without flinching. The monster responded with a menacing roar, and flames engulfed in primal fury erupted from its mouth. The fire blast sent Zhao flying backwards, but even as he fell, he didn't let go of his weapon. He twisted in the air, reloading his blaster, preparing for another charge. Once again, a green whirlwind hit the monster, causing it to recoil. Zhao, rising to his feet near the burning car, looked around, realizing the scale of the impending disaster. Through the smoke, he saw the approaching horde, and his voice was filled with despair. Damn! The zombies are rushing this way. One by one, the green discharges scattered the crowds of the dead, creating a protective circle around him. From inside the car, an old man's desperate cry came. Fatty Zhao, come back quickly. If you're surrounded by zombies, you won't escape. You're considered dead. But Zhao, surrounded by enemies, suddenly froze, sensing something was wrong. Phew, it seems to me that this is some kind of trap. And then the earth shook again from the actions of a truly gigantic figure, whose clawed paws were the harbinger of a new, terrifying threat. A colossal figure fell from above, its clawed paws a harbinger of terror that made No Zhao cry out. Before he could react, he felt a crushing blow that sent him flying to the ground as the monster prepared for its next attack. But No Zhao was not one to give up. With a furious cry, he aimed his weapon, charged with mysterious green energy. A bright beam of light burst out of the trunk, hitting the monster and causing it to recoil in surprise. Then No Zhao's weapon transformed, turning into a dazzling green, sharp scythe ready for battle. He rushed forward, delivering a single powerful blow that would stop the nightmarish creature. The blade pierced the flesh, and the monster shuddered, its body sparking from the touch of alien energy. Even the monster itself, shocked by such unexpected agility, could not believe its eyes. Could this fat man really be more agile than Ye Bei himself? But Zhao didn't waste a second, and his hand took aim again, not giving the monster any chance to strike back. A stream of multiple green beams rained down on the enemy, slamming him into the ground as he writhed in agony. With a victorious smile, No Zhao raised his weapon, savoring the moment of triumph over his defeated enemy. But at the top of a distant tower stood a mysterious figure, watching what was happening with a serene look. It was a girl, and an ominous purple energy was already pulsing in her hands, foreshadowing a new threat. And then the earth shook with a menacing murmur. A horde of zombies with blazing green eyes emerged from the forest thicket. They were approaching inexorably, their hungry howls echoing throughout the area, heading straight for No Zhao. But the triumph was short-lived, because No Zhao saw something out of the ordinary. The zombies, hitherto slow, suddenly acquired a frightening agility. They ran swiftly, their rotten bodies moving with unprecedented speed, and every step brought them closer to their prey. But Zhao, without thinking, rushed into battle, his scythe cutting through the air, crushing the undead around him. However, there were too many of them, and No Zhao, covered in sweat, felt growing despair. And then, looking at the approaching horror, he realized, among the 36 strategies, the best one, without a doubt, is retreat. But despair quickly gave way to a furious grin. He was not going to give up without a fight. The first blow landed on the closest one, knocking him out of the way. But what is this? Have the heavens opened to cast down even more monsters? With a deafening roar, a giant mutant fell to the ground, its eyes glowing with an ominous green fire. He continued to fight off the ordinary creatures, trying to clear a path for himself. Meanwhile, the monster that had fallen from the sky began to come to its senses, its body shaking. Before No Zhao's eyes, it transformed, taking on its true, terrifying form, and dragged its prey along with it. Dozens of other infected, drawn by the noise, moved towards the epicenter of the battle like ghosts. The giant creature threw one of the zombies with inhuman strength, like a lifeless doll. The blow was devastating, causing the ground to crack, and No Zhao barely dodged it. Surrounded by the dead, he realized the hopelessness of the situation as their numbers only increased. But his trusty blade and pistol, pulsing with green energy, gave him a ghost of a chance. He opened fire, tearing through the crowd of infected with streams of light. Their screams echoed throughout the area, mixing with the crackle of gunshots. What should I do? Flashed through his mind as No Zhao, overcome with panic, cried out for help. At that moment, another mutant hovered in the air, preparing for a swift attack. With agility he didn't expect from himself, No Zhao dodged the falling enemy, but the creature did not give up. Its glassy eyes burned with a thirst to kill. Flashing green, No Zhao's blade pierced the mutant's flesh, ending his agony. He breathed heavily, feeling the adrenaline leave his body a little more, and everything could have ended much worse. His gaze, full of tension, caught something terrifying. A new horde of zombies, with burning eyes, was advancing on him from all sides. The explosive projectile was dangerous at such a distance, and No Zhao's blade required space that was not available now. Without hesitation, hesitation, he directed his energy into the crowd, releasing a powerful green pulse. Each shot took away strength, and the enemies seemed endless, pressing in from all sides. The force of the recoil nearly knocked him off his feet, but he gritted his teeth, holding his position and continuing the fight. And then he saw them, monstrous mutants, breaking through the ranks of ordinary zombies, their faces distorted with madness. His attack seemed to only anger them, but did not stop the rapid wave. He understood that these creatures could not be defeated with a regular shot, but there was simply no choice. And at that critical moment, through the clouds of smoke, he appeared, Ye Bei, in all his formidable might. The massive mechanical limb crashed to the ground, shaking the surrounding area. Every part of the exoskeleton glowed with mysterious energy, preparing for a decisive battle. Ye Bei stood before him, the embodiment of strength and technology, ready to fight back against the onslaught of evil. A wave of elation washed over him. Brother Yi, he's here. He's finally here, like a beacon of salvation in the darkness. In the command center, an old man and a girl watched the scene unfold, their faces lit up with relief and genuine admiration. Could this really be the deadly weapon you've been working on? Flashed through his mind as he admired Ye Bei's power. But Ye Bei was serious. It was too early to relax, because the enemy still surrounded them in a tight ring. Clear instructions were given, dividing the areas of responsibility. Ye Bei took the right flank, and he got the left. With Ye Bei's support, he felt invincible, ready to face any threat that lay ahead. And, charged with new confidence, he unleashed a barrage of green flame on the zombies, clearing the way. Protected by his exoskeleton, the warrior concentrated, his gaze piercing the horizon in anticipation of the next onslaught. A powerful blast of green energy erupted from it, scattering crowds of enemies and leaving behind only scorched earth. Even the stern, blade-wielding companion could not hide his amazement at this spectacle of destructive power. A greedy light lit up his eyes, anticipating the untold riches, the black gold that could be collected from the defeated creatures. With a loud laugh, he rushed into the fight himself, his glowing blade cutting through the air, adding his share of fury to the chaos. Far below, from her vantage point, a young girl looked down on the carnage, surrounded by swirls of green flame. Next to her was a giant beast, and she, Ruokshi, was amazed and acknowledged the superiority of Ye Bei, whose power was so great that it could not even be approached. But in her eyes, which flashed with a purple light, one could read not only fear, but also a challenge. Did Ye Bei really believe that iron would save him from the inevitable?